Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we chart the course from service to civilian triumph. I'm Adam Peters, a veteran, entrepreneur, and your fellow navigator in the quest for a life of impact and fulfillment. My mission is simple: to empower you with the tools and stories that turn challenge into opportunity. Having walked the path from active duty to where I stand now, I understand the search for purpose that comes with hanging up the uniform. It's a path I've walked, with its trials, its tribulations, and its victories, and it's a journey we're on together. This podcast is more than just conversation. It's a beacon for those seeking to redefine our missions through entrepreneurship. It's about igniting the entrepreneurial spirit that lives within us, the spirit that compels us to create, lead, and make our mark on the world. Here we connect with veterans who have built businesses, sparked change, and found their purpose in the marketplace of ideas. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've transformed their service into startups, their experiences into enterprises, and they're proof that you can too. So whether you're scribbling business plans on napkins or stepping into the arena of innovation, remember, you're not alone. You're in good company. So let's explore these stories of transformation and take the first steps together on our path to purpose. Let's begin. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Strategic Veteran. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we have the honor of speaking with my friend and fellow service member, George Boyd, a retired U.S. Army veteran whose life story is a powerful testament to resilience, leadership, and transformation. George served for 3 years and 3 months in the U.S. Army, achieving the rank of E4, growing up in a lower middle-class family and moving across country twice as a teenager. He's faced significant challenges from an early age. He comes from a family marked by generational trauma and addiction, and yet he always stood out as the black sheep, recognizing dysfunction and striving to be better. His inspiration to join the military was deeply personal. He wanted to connect with his grandfather, an airborne glider infantryman who fought in World War II and Korea. Reading Lone Survivor by Marcus Luttrell in high school solidified his decision to pursue combat arms following his grandfather's footsteps. George's military service was profoundly shaped by pivotal moments, including the tragic deaths of fellow soldiers Brandon Buttry and PFC Cantu. These experiences, along with the suicides of others he served with, deeply impacted him and fueled his desire to pay it forward and help others. Transitioning from military to civilian life brought his own set of challenges, as George struggled with a lack of healthy support figures and found himself in an unhealthy environment. However, with the help of a Desert Storm veteran turned preacher and counselor, he learned to feel his emotions again and embarked on a path of healing and self-improvement. Today, George has founded Homefront Healing, a successful private practice. He's also been one of the youngest VFW post commanders in Texas and served as the director of clinical services for rehab for adolescent males. His core values of selfless service, mercy, grace, compassion, duty, and excellence guide him in all his endeavors. Join us as we delve into George's extraordinary story, exploring his military service, transition to civilian life, and ongoing mission to help others heal and thrive. So let's dive in and warmly welcome George Boyd, a true embodiment of what it means to be a strategic veteran. George, brother, it's weird to call you George, first of all.
I know. I want to call you Sergeant Peters. Sergeant Peters.
No, we don't do that anymore. But I'm grateful that you're here, man. I appreciate you spending some time with me today to do this and put your story out there to other veterans and help them. So welcome to the show, dude.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. That was an awesome intro. Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's like, we got to do you your justice, man. Cause everybody's got a unique story. Everybody's got significant things that have impacted their lives. And it's just part of putting kind of the whole picture together. So that being said, dude, let's jump right in and let's talk about early life, where you grew up and what inspired you to join.
Yeah, man. So early life, it's cool. I was born here in Fort Worth, Texas. But when I was 6 months old, my parents moved out to Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg. And so growing up out there, we lived in a municipality about 30 minutes away, out in a rural area. Um, Growing up was cool, man. Out in North Carolina, I loved it. Nice country. Um, and I remember we started going to this church back in 2000, Green Springs Baptist. A lot of service members at that church. Um, and so I even remember, there was a lot of special forces, being that Bragg was an SF community. We had a Green Beret who was like one of our child Sunday school teachers, right? He was real involved with the kiddos. And when 9/11 happened, he was one of the first to go. I mean, like within a couple of months, you know what I mean? And he never came back, and so that kind of, impacted me at a very young age. I was probably like 8 years old, 9 years old. And, kids at school, their parents were service members. You just, when you grow up in a military town, number one, it's weird being not military connected, because everybody always asks that. But, I can remember my mom driving me to doctor's appointments and seeing convoys just going around Fayetteville. And so I don't know, it always kind of impacted me knowing my grandfather had served in the military and I'd never met him. I mean, I was that kid, 8 years old, using pine cone grenades. You know
Yeah,
what I
man.
mean? Just
Yeah,
playing out
man.
in the front yard. That was my
S-
jam.
Sticks.
Yep, you know it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, man, that happened. And so I think that kind of set the tone. And I can remember, this sounds really crazy, but I remember being like 12 or 13 and being like, man, I hope the war is still on when I'm 18. I hope there's something to go do.
So this is 2001. How old were you?
Oh God, 8. I was 8.
So, fuck, dude. This is really showing my age here because, we're 2 years away from me going on my first
Right.
deployment, and then you and I were on the same deployment, which was my last deployment, which is crazy to think about,
Did
right? Like, think about the amount of
well,
time
this
between first and fourth for me versus you're a 8-year old and I'm getting ready to deploy for the first time. Insane.
absolutely. Staff Sergeant Jari Townsend, right? He was the squad leader I kind of revere the highest. He had me under his wing for over 2 years. His date of rank was when I was in like 7th grade or 6th grade. You know?
Yeah, that's oh, I love Jari. What a great dude
Oh
that
yeah,
was, man.
absolutely, man.
What a great dude he was. So your grandfather is really a big kind of draw on your service for you, and just was it hearing stories about him? Did you rummage through some of his belongings that maybe were left behind? I know for me, uh, I adored my grandfather. I don't know why. I don't really remember him a lot, and as I've aged and my dad has opened up about like what kind of person my grandfather actually was, I don't know why I was so attached to him. I think because I just my memories of my grandfather are sitting on his lap and playing with his many watches. I think it's why I'm fascinated with watches to this day. But he was also a World War II medic, and so the coolest thing in the world for me was getting to go through his stuff after he passed away. Stuff that my dad has still got put away that he won't let me have until he's gone because it somehow means something to him or whatever. But is that how you kind of were introduced to your grandfather since you said you never met him?
Um, Kind of, sorta, man, and that's that's a large part of the story. Everything I know about my grandfather has been obviously through word of mouth and what other people have said. And the crazy thing is, man, he did 23 and a half years in the Army. He retired as I think it was a CW3. He went infantry to CID. Okay. And so, yeah, dude, he was involved in the Nuremberg trials, and he was all over, but he was legit one of those guys that he never, ever, ever talked about it, never once. My dad told me a story. You know that movie A Bridge Too Far with Sean
I
Connery?
do.
And
Yeah.
so my dad said one time when he was a teenager, my dad was watching that movie in the living room, and my grandpa walked in and was like, "What the hell is that?" And my dad's like, "Oh, it's this movie about Operation Market Garden," and something along the lines of my grandpa just saying, "Oh, well, turn it off. I was there," you know. And that was my dad said he'd never talked about the battles he was involved in, what he did. Everything kind of came from reading letters after he passed, right? Things like that. And even then, his memorabilia, he didn't hold on to a lot. He really didn't. And I know this now, his records were one of those that got burned in the big records fire of like 1973 or whatever. Um,
Yeah. I relate to your grandfather in a lot of ways because what you see behind me is all I have left of my time in the military. That's almost true. I have one ACU uniform that's still put together, and I have my Class A's, my dress blues that are still put together. But other than that, I let everything go, all of it.
yeah. No, we had an expeditionary medal that had a blood stain on it. And so I don't know if that was I don't know if that was a pinning or what. Um,
Yeah, let your mind wander on that one, huh?
right. I know there's blood on it, but no, man, there wasn't a whole lot. And I think because there wasn't a whole lot, I kind of wanted to have a shared experience, I
For
guess.
sure.
So, I'm actually named after my grandfather. So I'm actually George Boyd the
Uh,
fourth, and he was junior.
Okay.
So that's part of it also, of like kind of growing up with somebody else's name, being like, man, I want to honor them and honor their story, right?
So you just from birth, just having the name is probably just some kind of like connectedness and just calling for you to go do this, right? Like, and then you talk about in high school you read Lone Survivor as a big key influence for you joining. And I'm curious, I read that book while I was on a deployment. It's one of my favorite books ever. That story is incredible. I'm sure most people listening to this already know that story, but why the Army Infantry and not the Navy SEALs after reading that book?
Man, every kid wants to be a Navy SEAL, right? So
I didn't. Believe it or not, I didn't.
do you remember that old PS2 game, SOCOM US Navy SEALs?
No, I'm not a big video game player.
You're good, man. So I was like, it came out when I was like 8, maybe even 7. But man, when I was a kid, that PS2 was my jam. And so I loved these games, and they were actually somewhat sponsored by SOCOM. Okay. Like they worked with Navy SEALs and military correspondents to make the game authentic, which for a PlayStation 2 game back in the day with polygon graphics, that was cool. The involvement that they had, right? So I played that a lot growing up, and I was fast. I knew what Navy SEALs were when I was 8 years old, you know. Um, but as a teenager, I think I got realistic, and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think SEALs are for me. 2 years, 3 years of training, I'm good, right? Um, why Army Infantry? Again, my grandfather's story, and he was 82nd Airborne in World War II in the European theater. um, I don't know, man. Growing up at Bragg, 82nd infantry was just always fascinating to me, right? Um, truthfully, man, when it came time to go to the recruiter's office, I was a toss up between 13 Fox, which was Fister, and 11 X-ray. And man, I was like, oh, that 13 Fox though, that interests me. And I'm glad. I think I made the right choice. I'm not a numbers guy.
Yeah, I was gonna. I bet you're glad that you didn't go 13 Fox. That's awesome, man. So talk to us about you go through basic training, and you were just telling me the story offline, but I think it's an important story to kind of paint a picture of how shitty the Army can be sometimes. So you get through basic training, and you end up at Fort Lewis, Washington, or JBLM for those. I still call it Fort Lewis. I don't know
I
what
call
you
it
call it,
Lewis.
but
Yeah, Fort Lewis.
yeah, there you go. So what was that like for you? And kind of you didn't. I mean, you got there, and then yeah, you just tell the story. It's going to be way better.
No, it was, I got there at a very weird time. So I got to Fort Lewis. I want to say it was like June, golly, like 12th or something. I don't know. It was like, early June 2012. Um, right away, I got assigned to 4th Striker Brigade combat team, and 4-9 infantry. I was the Manchus. Um, and so, when I got there, I remember the base was, talking, "Hey, 3rd Brigade is deployed. They are in Afghanistan, and 4th Brigade's gonna be ripping with them." That was like in reception, we got told that, all right? So I'm like, "Okay." I get over there to the Manchus, and it's funny too, man. I get assigned to a freaking tanker platoon, okay, to the MGS platoon, and I'm like, "What the hell? Why am I here?" And they're like, "We need a driver." They're like, and dude, other guys, man, I was a youngster, man. I had just turned 19. I turned 19 the week I graduated basic, right? And I was salty, dude. I was really salty. I'm like, man, all this hype and talk, busting your butt to be an infantryman, and oh, you're gonna be a tanker driver, bitch. You know?
Right. Yeah. And for those that are listening, tankers and infantry guys, they don't get along.
No, and dude, they loved it, bro. Oh, they loved having a little, cherry infantryman. Boyd, why is the sky blue? And I would bite, dude. I'd bite. I'd be like, because God loves the infantry. Do push-ups, and we would turn it into a game, dude. I'm sitting there getting smoked. All you got to say, Boyd, is tankers are better, And I'm like, nope, ain't saying it.
Yeah, man. So what's going through your head when I mean, obviously you're pissed because you're going to be an MGS driver, and that's not how it pans out, huh?
No, that is not how it pans out. I was salty, man, and that's what's kind of funny, as I told you a little bit already. But as I'm starting to accept my spot, like, okay, this is what it is. It's probably not going to be forever, but you're going to be driving an MGS, right? Um, I go home on pre-deployment leave. I remember they all talked it up. Hey, we're going to go on leave for 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to come home for about a month or so, month or two, and then we're going to rip with third. Um, and so I end up, home. I go home. My parents were still living in Houston, Texas at the time. So I flew down there. It was weird too, man, being 19, a year out of high school. Um, just, I don't know, the gravity of that. I remember going home and all my friends or acquaintances, they're all, dude, just doing 19-year-old stuff, beer pong, and, they're kids because we were kids, right? 19
Kids,
years old, you are a
kids.
child.
Yep.
And so, dude, I remember, little house parties just like I had when I was in high school. I'm like, man, it's like almost nothing changed except everything changed, right? And so driving down to Galveston, I remember I was going to go to Galveston with a friend that day. Um, and basically, when we're halfway down there, it was about an hour and a half drive. Platoon sergeant rings. I get a phone call, and he says to me too. He goes, "Boyd, are you sitting down right now?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm in a car." And he goes, "Look, man, I've been in the Army 15 years, and I have never ever seen this. But you came down on orders to go to Third Brigade to be a replacement." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "I thought we're ripping with third." He goes, "I know, man. We're gonna be over there in like 3 or 4 months, but it is what it is, Boyd. You got to fly back tomorrow." And they said if you don't fly back, that you'll get missing movement, right? And I was like, "Well, crap. Okay, I was shocked, man. I remember that, like, just like numb, almost like disbelief might be a good word for it, you know. And knowing what I know now, I had a lot of guys that were like, "Bro, you could have fought that. You were already signed out on leave, this, that, and the other." I was a kid, man. I was like, "All right, let's do it."
Yeah, you don't know anything. You're just doing what the platoon sergeant tells you to do, right? Like
Exactly. I'd been in the army.
five
Oh my
minutes.
god, all 5 months, really? Yeah, which is 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm like, "What is this?" So I ended up going home. I told my parents, and it was heavy because I was supposed to still be home for like a week and a half. I had been home a few days. And I remember my mom helped me get on the phone with the airline and get like a new airline ticket moved around, and the whole orders thing and this, that, and the other. So we got it taken care of, man. And I flew back, and it sucks. So this is where me and Brian Norris, I don't know if you remember him.
I remember Norris, redhead kid, right?
So me and Brian Norris, man, to this day, I mean, that's still who I consider my best friend. We'll go 6 months without talking, and I'll drive up there, and it's like we pick up like we never left off. You know, um, is it okay if I go back a little bit?
Absolutely, dude. Yeah, tell your story, man.
So I get to Fort Lewis, Washington at reception, right? And you remember where that was, right? Over there, kind of by our brigade. And so I'm sitting there again. I'm 19, and I had seen Norris, like he got there a day or two before me, right? We never knew each other. And basically, fast forward, it's nighttime. I'm walking down the hallway, and there is this redneck from Fayetteville, Arkansas, right? In the mountains, passed out in the hallway. Okay. Like just like slumped over. And here comes and I'm like, oh, I don't know who that is, not my business. And here comes the CQ NCO. Boy, do you know who this is? I said, I think his name's Norris, Sergeant, I met him briefly. So no, I said I think his name is Norris. I met him briefly the other day, um, and he said, "Well, Boyd, he's your responsibility now." And I said, "What?" And he said, "This is your responsibility now. You need to take care of him and get him to bed. And if you don't, you're going to be answering for it." And I was like, "What the fuck? Like this is just reception?"
Yeah, welcome to the army.
Right, dude. And so I'm like picking this dude up. I'm like, Norris, wake up, And he's out, man. He's out like a light. And so I pick him up, dude, and like drag him down the hallway and get him in his rack. And that was it. That was the start of this friendship, right? He actually
It's usually how they go in the army too. It's always something stupid like that. Somebody passed out somewhere, or somebody fighting somebody somewhere. Fuck, you're sometimes you're even fighting each other.
Well, oh, we'll get to that. But no, man. So he gets assigned to, oh God, was it 187 maybe? I don't know. It was one of those battalions over on 4th Brigade too. And so, we parted ways. He went to a different battalion, I went to a different battalion. Fast forward, get called off a leave, right? I remember even telling him, I don't have a car. How am I supposed to get to battalion? Well, you better start walking. Takes about 45 minutes, walk around the airfield, you know? And so literally, dude, I was like, shit. Like I had to start that walk to work around the airfield, super early. I'm sitting there thinking this sucks. And then I hear a guy, hey, hey. And I turn around and, about 100 yards behind me on the sidewalk is freaking Norris. And I said, hey, man, that had been 2 or 3 months at this point. And what are you doing? Well, I'm walking over to 3rd Brigade. I got some bullshit, got called on some orders. I said, me too, and
Shit. It happened to Norris too. Damn.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yep, happened to Norris too, man. And there was a couple other guys like Private Miller and Seco, Private Vicente and Bico. I went to basic with Vicente. There was a handful of us that got called from 4th Brigade to go over.
It's because we were hurting over there, man. It was rough, particularly before. I mean, because if this is June, right? You said it was June. You're getting these orders.
Orders were early August. Early August, the orders got cut.
Okay, so I mean, early August, we had just put the balloon up. So it was rough before the balloon went up. Real rough.
That was like you're talking the G-Lock days, right? I
Oh
remember.
yeah.
I heard
Oh
stories.
yeah. Yeah. So you didn't get to participate in any of
No, I
that.
heard G-Lock was
But
fun though.
so how are you taking the deployment? Are you ready for this? I mean, I know it's a shock getting orders kind of whatever early or whatever, but that is kind of a common thing in the army. It happens all the time. So it shouldn't have been that much of a shock to you. It's just moving the time to table up a little bit. But how are you feeling about deployment at this point? Because you haven't really had any chance to train with a regular army unit at all. So you're coming from basic training to what I assume is probably some kind of rear detachment element.
hmm So
Because I think fourth brigade was over there as well, right?
4th was in Yakima when I got there.
Okay, so they were in Yakima. That's how it happened to me too. So I got to ACO and I was walking up or crutching up to ACO because I still had a bad foot. And they were fucking pulling out instructors to go to Yakima for 2 weeks. I was like, thank God I missed that one. Right? Like, thank God I missed that one.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I'll sit on CQ and play video games.
Right. Well, and the worst part for me is because I'm coming as an NCO, a senior NCO, right? And for me, it was very very much like I've never been on rear D before, and I'm in a boot because I wasn't supposed to PCS from Fort Stewart to Fort Lewis. I just had another surgery, whatever. So I'm automatically treated like the biggest piece of shit NCO on the planet, and I was like, all right, I see how rear D is going to go. And thank God when they got back, First Sergeant Rob was the first sergeant because that man, I owe that man basically the last half of my career. And that's a story for another day. But I think you'll probably agree. First Sergeant Rob is one of the greatest leaders I ever had in the Army.
Oh, dude, he's old school Army. I wish I knew more about him. You know what I mean? I know he is. Yes, I know.
Yeah,
You know what I
for
mean?
sure.
And again,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, and that's why we'll talk, dude, because the unit, the whole, I had such a unique, awkward experience. I'm still close. You remember Daniel Potter?
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
still close with Daniel. And he always, I remember he told me, he said, Boyd, you are the ass end of the old Army, and that Georgia accent of his. But it's true, dude. And I can look back on it, and hindsight's 2020, and be like, wow, that was not typical, or that was not normal, right? Um, so yeah, back to Norris, right? Um, like I said, we ended up going from brigade to, and I'm trying to remember, man, if we were brigade to battalion. I think maybe they got us to battalion level before we went wheels up. So I want to say
Okay.
at that point we were already, when we lined up at McCord, we knew what our battalion was already.
So you knew you were part of 123.
Correct, because I do remember we had to step through S1 briefly, right,
Okay.
as we were getting ready to leave. Um,
So you probably met Remington and Skiba and all those guys, or did you meet those when you got to Zangabad?
Skiba sounds familiar, and I don't know if he was overseas already or not.
I think he came later. I don't remember, man. It's been a decade, right? It's
Oh,
been a
yeah, I'm
decade since
racking. Isn't that crazy?
yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
12 years, bro. 12 years since
There
2012.
you go. I was kind of thinking the end of it, right? So you go 11 years, whatever, but yeah, it's been a long time, man. And when you really put it into perspective for me, last week would have been my 21st year in the army, June 24th, right? So we're looking at 3 days. 3 days ago was my 21-year anniversary. That's insane to think about too. But so you get to 123, your wheels up, you land in Afghanistan. What had you heard about that deployment? Because I talk about it not super often on this show, but for me, having 4 deployments, I did 3 to Iraq. This was my first to Afghanistan. This deployment, in terms of everything that I had to deal with, for me, was far and away the worst deployment I ever did. It often overshadows everything from the other 3 deployments. I'm not saying that I didn't see or experience things that were traumatizing or whatever in the other deployments. It's just this one, due to what I was doing as the talk NCOIC, because I was hurt. However, we could talk about that later or whatever. I was really good at that fucking job. Becoming the quote unquote fobbit and being a little bit pissed off about it, but also understanding that I had volunteered to get myself into this deployment. When you're a TOC NCOIC, I was basically in charge of everybody on the COP. Like First Sergeant gave me a ridiculous amount of power to do a ridiculous amount of things. And all of the stuff that happened, I felt like was my responsibility. Everything, right? Like everything from the dudes that got hurt to the IED that I missed, or that maneuver element that I missed, or whatever. It was all felt like my fault. So, what had you heard about what was going on over there at that point, and how nervous were you coming over?
Um, it was interesting because when I was still in 4th Brigade, we had a breakfast at one of the DFACs right before we signed out on leave. And it was kind of a come to Jesus breakfast, right? Like platoon sergeant, lieutenant was there. And it was like in anticipation of the deployment. And they were just talking, man. And our old platoon sergeant, he ended up being the cop mayor for 4th Brigade once they took over at Mushan. Can't remember his name, can remember his face. But no, I mean, he told us, guys, this is the valley of the shadow of death. I remember him saying those words. And he said, we're anticipating casualties. He was like, this is going to be a rough deployment. People are going to get hurt. People are going to get killed. No, no. And so, being a 19-year-old, I'm like, is this real life right now? You know what I mean? Like, is this my first deployment right out of basic is about to be this crazy, crazy thing? Um, again, when you're a PFC right out of basic, I mean, you're nothing, right? You don't even, like you said, 5 minutes, man. You don't know what's up or what's down. You don't know what's typical or what's not. You just go where you're told, when you're told, how you're told, right? And so no, they were very clear though in telling us that this was going to be hellacious. Um, they didn't know how long they were gonna. I think 4th Brigade was only there, dude, like 5 months. They closed down the cop, and they didn't know that when we were being briefed, or they didn't tell us that. They told us like kind of battlefield operations. Um, and so no, man, and they just kept telling us. I remember everybody, even the freaking taxi drivers and the PX workers. Yeah, I heard 3rd Brigade's getting slammed. 3rd Brigade's getting messed up. So like everybody knew that 3rd Brigade was getting hit hard. Interestingly, I had a drill sergeant in basic who used to be 520. Okay, and he had friends that had deployed with the brigade, and I mean he had friends that died in April of 12. So I remember being in basic hearing about 3rd Brigade's deployment before I even had orders to Fort Lewis, you know which is interesting.
Yeah. So let's move into that deployment. You get to Afghanistan. I assume you went through Zangabad first, and then they assigned you. Where did they assign you to?
So we went through, the usual way. We went Manas to Calf. Like I said, when we get to Calf, we don't even have freaking weapons yet, dude. We had just drawn the plates in Manas. It was a
You deployed without plates even?
yeah, yeah, dude. It was a
Oh,
cluster, man.
Jesus. They were fucked up as a
Yeah, yeah,
football
dude. It
bat,
was a
huh?
super cluster. But bro, half of my gear got shipped off in the Connex with Fourth Brigade. It was already on its way overseas, like my C bag and stuff, and B bag. All of my
Oh,
stuff,
man.
and I told them, like, all of my gear, "Oh, you're good, you'll get what you need over there." I remember them telling me that, dude, "You'll get what you need over there." I'm like, "Oh, okay." 2 duffels. Oh,
That's
dude,
the wrong
2
answer.
duffel bags of gear, and I'll get to that because I was super salty by the end of the deployment, but,
I believe it.
no,
Yeah.
man, so, like I said, we land in freaking Kandahar with no weapons. They didn't even issue us weapons yet. I don't think we got M4s until we were at the tent city in Kandahar, right? And guess what? And I heard from some supply guys over the years, they were like, "Oh no," and I actually know. I don't want to say his name. I don't know. I heard Treaster had a hand to doing this. They took the optics off of all the rifles. We didn't even have irons. And I remember the replacement NCOIC, he was like, "What the fuck is this?" He was like, "We can't use this. Like, who did this? Like, how did they mess this up? There's not even irons on these rifles." And I heard it was by intention, right? I don't know if that's true or not. It's just what I heard.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not either, but I
It's kind of
mean,
funny
if
now.
you heard it, yeah, it's right, get there with you basically have a Jesus, Kentucky windage, I guess, right? Like,
Dude, that is so yeah. Well, I told you, they told us you have to travel in pairs of threes and everybody carry a Gerber with you. And they were like, if somebody attacks you, y'all just shank them. They told us that. We're like, okay.
damn.
Um,
Any
so finally, yeah, we hop a Chinook ride to Zbad. And it's funny, man. I'm sitting there and we were in the tent and I had brought my laptop with me. And so we were watching Band of Brothers at Zangabad. And I remember it was funny, dude, because it was the Battle of the Bulge scene, right? Where they're getting shelled really bad. And I remember me and Norris and I think a couple other guys were sitting there watching. And as we're watching the scene and it's during the bombardment, all of a sudden you hear like boom, right? And it kind of, you can tell, I was like, that didn't sound like it was in the movie, right? And then you hear another one, boom. Um, what it was, man, because we were like, what the crap is going on right now? They just had us in a replacement tent. It was actually an outgoing mortar mission, right? They had and it was nighttime, dude. It was dark, and I guess there was an IED in place or really close to the wire too at Zbad. I think PTIDs caught them, and but yeah, we ran out there because we didn't know what the crap was going on. And that was all it was outgoing. But right there's a great example, man. Being replacements, we didn't have any leadership. I mean, literally, we were policing ourselves for the most part. Um,
who was the highest ranking guy you had with you?
in Zangabad and E3,
Oh my god. So it's how many of you?
probably 4 at this point,
4
because
E3s running around
we had
unsupervised.
NCOICs at Kandahar, but then they all got assigned to headquarters or SECO, right? I don't, you know what? Lie. E4, Specialist Tucker, Ranger bat guy, Ranger Scroll.
I remember
Tucker
Tucker.
was with us. So he ended up coming with us all the way to Mushan. And so we
Okay.
kind of looked at him, but even then, bro, he wasn't leading us or policing us. It was
No, he was probably salty because he's not in Ranger Bat anymore.
funny story I heard about his. So when I was in basic, they told us, "Hey guys, 4 Rangers just got shocked by lightning last week. Be careful." Tucker was one of those 4,
Shit.
and so right
Jesus.
to get there. Oh yeah, no, that was me. That's how I didn't get through Ranger school because of that. And I was like, oh, we heard about that in basic training at Sand Hill. Um, but anyway, no man. So we hung out at Zbad for I think 2 or 3 days, and then they kept telling us, "Oh, you'll go tomorrow. You'll go tomorrow." It was been like that since freaking Minas. And so finally, a striker convoy rolled through, and I remember Tucker said something. He said, "Man, with our luck, we're gonna hit something on the way to the cop." you know. And so they loaded us up. Little Sergeant Miller was on that run. And so yeah, man, they came and scooped us up, and they almost forgot about us too. And we're like, "Hey, is that the convoy going to Mushan?" And they're like, "Yep, load up." And so we just hopped in, dude, and rolled down to good old Mushan. And then when we
And how was your so Zangabad was completely built
Mhm.
up, right? Like it was far and away probably 100 times better
Oh,
than
yeah, it's a
Mushan, I would
fortress,
say.
you know what I mean?
It, what were you thinking when you got to Mushan? You're like, oh shit.
Well, yeah. Well, I had heard, and I'll tell you, man, I had heard stories from Kandahar. Guys ran in when we were at the boardwalk. Guys ran into guys they knew, right? Um, I remember a guy that was at. He's either maybe he was it Telecon Bico.
Yeah, it was Mushan, Talakon, and then Zangabad, right? We're headquarters in Charlie. We're at Zangabad. Bravo was at Talakon, right up the road. Well, not right up the road, but and then we were all the way out there in the Horn by ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, I heard horror stories, man, at the boardwalk. And PNN, so you always got to take it with a grain of salt. But man, they had me pop a um oh god, tracheotomy on a freaking dying dude just to practice my combat lifesaver. Oh, my dog is just
He's
like that. I'm
entertaining the
out.
fuck out of me right now, brother. I'm listening, but that's awesome. He just buried himself in your bed. All right, I
He,
love it.
he runs this house. What's it called? So, no, man. So we get there, and I remember thinking, "Oh, that guy's crazy, dude. That's not true, right? That's not true. They're not going to have infantry privates practicing, first aid on dying bodies, right?" And so, no, man. I remember getting to Mushan, and I was kind of just, okay, here we are. This is it. I remember not being like, oh, Mushan. Oh God, it's nothing. I remember being glad we had porta potties because my buddies at Bico were burning barrels,
And
you know.
piss tubes. Yep.
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 And so I was like, okay, this could be worse, right? Um, we get
Well, and when you got there, so you this is already after Navarro and Barrera and
guess guess what day it was that we rolled up to
what
Mushan?
day?
9/11. I remember that
Damn.
because and it took us. We left freaking Lewis, man, like third week of August. I think that's how long it took us to get to Mushan.
So you're coming into just a really somber energy because we had been beat up from March to September, right? Like the deployment is winding down for us because that's been a 9 month deployment, and we had got the PGIS at the end of July, about 3 weeks after Navarro, where I was actually blamed for all of that, and that's neither here nor there. We could talk about that another time offline, but it was rough, man. And we had gone to work. I had gone to work doing a lot after the balloon went up, and we had finally, right around when you're rolling up, got everything in check. I mean, like I was shit hot with fire missions and really just killing dudes, lots of dudes, killing dudes. So I can imagine, what that energy's like for you. But there were several experiences that influenced you on that deployment. And the first one was the first one Buttrey or was the first one Cantu?
Oh, well, Cantu was after, man. Cantu, and
Okay, so Cantu was after.
yeah, Cantu died in Garrison like a year and a half later.
Okay,
And I'll tell you the first thing what it was because when we got there, they did the little private draft. Me, Norris, Lundigan, and Daniker wound up in first platoon. I took Nick Jordan's spot, and first platoon had just gotten their last contact outside the wire. I think they said 2 days before we
was
got there.
Petey still the platoon sergeant at that point, or had he gone home already?
No, he was still. Are we talking about Russell?
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
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 Petey,
yeah, dude.
yeah,
He was
it's
he
my
was
buddy,
still there
man.
for about a week or 2, I think, when we first got there. He
Okay,
picked us. He was part of the draft, but he was on his way
okay,
out already because and that idiot
He-
that hurt a lot of people. You know what I mean? He was, yeah. That's another story. I always
yeah.
feel for Russell, man. I think about him often, actually.
I get to see him here in a couple of weeks. I'm going to spend a week with him in Salt Lake.
Yep. Tell
So
him I said hello.
he and I have a pact, man. Neither one of us is allowed to do anything stupid till we're
There you go.
75.
I always looked up to him, man,
Because
because I don't know why, because he didn't have a lot of influence on my service, right? He had maybe he picked me, I don't know, and that was it,
well, you don't know the same Russell that I know. He's very much a mentor to
right?
me. He was a solid leader, and I don't know, he just exemplified so much of what I wanted to be in the Army, and I think that radiates off of him. I think even you'll agree with just the short amount of time you spent
He
around
was a
him,
leader.
you just yeah, absolutely. The commanded a presence, and he's not a big dude. He's at all. I think he weighs like 145
Half
pounds
my
now. He's
size.
like maybe 5'5" or 5'6", but endless amounts of energy. He would roll with me and Mike, what's Big
Führer.
Mike, and
Yeah.
yeah, Fuhrer, and he would roll with Ramos, and he would just outlast everybody. His energy was just through the freaking roof. But yeah, man, I love that man a lot, and he's helped me a lot in my post service and transition and all of that. So what did you experience on that deployment? You going out of the wire? Were you doing the Valen thing?
So I wasn't Valen. I was a saw gunner. Okay. But I will tell you, because, our first week, I think it's when they're trying to tell, hey, are the new guys idiots or not? Are they going to get themselves and other people killed? They're kind of feeling you out, right? Giving you classes and trainings. Uh,
Well, particularly because we knew you guys had come straight from basic to a rear detach, not like the whole scenario, but we knew you hadn't had any training, and plus, not a whole lot of training you could do for what's going on at Mushan. Like it's fucked, man. It was, and I've got tons of combat experience at this point, but this is unlike anything I'd ever seen.
Right. And so no, I remember them giving I think it was 3 days of classes before we went on our first patrol. And our last day, man, it was the medic class. Okay. Probably been on Mushan a couple of days at this point. And I remember me and Norris. I don't know where the other replacements were. Maybe I don't know if they were doing something else, but I remember me and Norris were there for sure. And Doc Reds, right? Doc Reds and I think Templeton was in the aid station, and they're giving us this class, man. And then like wee wee wee, whatever how their systems work, the radios kicked on. They went over, and it was a real world thing. Second platoon had been on patrol, and those two guys, bomb had gone off on them. I guess while they were burying the IED or something or another, right? Two nationals got hit, and so they told us, "Hey guys, they're bringing in two guys. This is the real deal. Y'all can stay and be involved if you want, And somebody said something along, I don't know. They just said you can be involved, and do stuff. And we were like, no, no, we're good. You know what I mean? And they're like, okay. And I was like, do we have to stay? And they're like, no, you don't have to stay. And I was like, all right. And I was like, Norris, do you want to go? And he's like, yeah, I want to go. So we stepped out on the porch, man. Pulled out a cigarette, and we sparked up, and I remember we were sitting there smoking when second platoon came into Mushan, hot to trot. And I remember just because I hadn't been outside the wire yet, so these guys are covered in moon dust, right? They're sweaty. They're running two nationals in on stretchers. And I remember, dude, and this was just my perspective, right? I'm sitting there at the porch of the aid station. The first gentleman that went in, he was, a military age male. His eyes were closed, right? And I remember he was just peppered up, and I remember that was like my first time ever seeing, being wounded, right? What a war injury looks like, right? And so he was out though already. I don't know if he had a pulse or whatnot, but what jacked me up, man, was the second one. It was a younger kid, right? Or he was a teenager of sorts, and he was still conscious. I remember his eyes were still open, and I remember he had a piece of shrapnel just like sticking out of his chest, and I remember just seeing the blood trail. And I remember as I'm sitting there smoking, I locked eyes with him, and just locked eyes with him. And I remember thinking about my little brother who was like 13 or 14 at the time, right? And I don't know, dude. It was just game on from there, like
It's like your first brush with mortality and what war really is, and yeah, I relate, man, 100%.
and it set the tempo for the rest of my time there, that like
Because that wasn't going to be the last time that some nationals were going to be brought in. I mean, I thinking back to one, I thought you were going to tell the story of the one where Bonds and I were switching places with the dude who blew his legs and his nutsack off, and we're doing CPR on him, and it's like, why are we actually doing CPR on him? Because he's dead essentially. But yeah, man, yeah, that's not the first. Well, that's the first time for you, but not the last time you're going to see some shit like that.
no. But and right away, right off the rip, it set the tempo. And then, you know, and of course, man, the good old replacement treatment, which, you know, that's a tale as old as time, dude. You know, Band of Brothers, you know, they had an episode replacements, right? Other guys, they just took it, right? Other guys were like, Boyd, it is what it is. I had a hard time accepting that because I said, bullshit. We put up with the hazing. I went through all the bullshit already at 4th Brigade. I'm not putting up with it again. I'm not being treated like, you know, the shit on the bottom of my shoe. And I know it's kind of petty, but I'd be the first when people are like, oh, yeah, Boyd came straight from basic. No, man, I did 3 months at 4th Brigade. You know, just like stop saying that I'm just some, but you know how it is, man. And I had a weird experience, dude, because, you know, first platoon, they were, I don't know, dude. They were odd, you know, at times. I'm thinking more of junior enlisted, right? But you know, they were I don't know, dude. They were salty because of Jordan, who got hit, and I took his cot, his gun, his everything, right? Um, and some of those,
Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's a real
well,
thing though
not
that
to
you go
sound,
through, right?
hear me out, okay? And a lot of people, first platoon leadership knew about this more towards the end. There was a lot of hazing that went on, dude. I think I went through 6 or 7 cots during my 3 months at Mushan, because I was getting jumped in the
Wow.
middle of the night all the time. Um,
By first platoon guys?
mhm. And so I remember,
Because I wasn't seeing that, right?
no, you were. I think you and Bond had. I think Bonds was the cop mayor when I got there,
Yeah, because Bonds was involved in that friendly fire incident, and it
right?
broke him mentally. I mean, when you get shot in the back and the neck by your own dudes, that'll do something to you.
That was the same one Apolsky was in, right?
Yeah, dude, there was so much that, and I was a part of every single one of them. So like, I can't keep them all straight. But you're absolutely right.
I ended up, me and Apolsky were the same size. I ended up accidentally in the dryer getting our laundry mixed around, and so I had a shirt that had his blood stain on it, and I just always thought it was cool too. I'm wearing a Polsky's friendly fire shirt, you know, that's what I would call it. But no, man. So
Yeah,
I went through a lot of
yeah.
cots. I remember, you know, doing EPW training, and then boom, they're zip cuffing me for real, beating the shit out of me. And
Who took over as platoon sergeant for
David
first
Hill,
platoon? When
Staff Sergeant Hill, you
Okay,
know, and I
that's
got
right.
assigned.
I haven't talked to him since he got out.
Yeah, I got assigned to second squad, which was Nate Audie, right? And then Victor Zazueta was my first team leader at ACO. And Z, man, I liked Z. He was a no shit guy. He could be stern, but he was fair. He wasn't one of the shitty ones. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
He was fair. He was a good leader. Audie was awesome. Me and Norris couldn't sing his praises enough. He really did what he could to look out for us. But again, dude, you know, we were never quick to, you know, cry. You know what I mean? You don't do that. Um, Audie smoked me once. I remember because he caught wind of what was going on, and he said, "Boyd, why aren't you fucking them up?" And I said, "Well, Sergeant, I'm just not trying to rock the boat too much, right?" He said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I just, you know, I don't want to cause conflict." Oh boy, that triggered him. He smoked the shit out of me. He said, "I don't want a pussy in my squad." He said, "I want you to start conflict and I want you to finish conflict." Like he just, I don't know, that was his thing. I was like,
He was giving you permission at that point.
yeah, dude, and he smoked me. And so I remember, man. But you know what these little snakes were doing, dude? For example, dude, and I'll air his name out. I don't care. He's a snake. Rao, you know, Jeremy Rao. Dude, he got on top of me one day, and I remember, man, I'm sitting there, and that was the first time I was like, I'm not putting up with this, man. He was like straddling me, bop, bop, got him in the face like 2 or 3 times, and he just smiled. He said, "Ooh, I can't wait to go tell the sergeants you just assaulted me." You know, and he went, dude, and that's, well, Sergeant, no, he was, oh, didn't matter, you know, didn't matter, dude. I was getting smoked, you know, just right. Didn't matter what I did. If I breathed, I was getting smoked, you know.
Didn't he end up getting his back though? Him and somebody else. Didn't first sergeant take care of that one night for a long, long time, or was that before you got there?
I might have been before, dude. I don't know. Not that I
See, like
know
I
of.
said, there was a bunch of shit that happened on that
Oh, I heard
deployment.
about
Anyway,
Rod's punishment for
that
falling
one,
asleep on
yeah,
guard.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Well, and then he tried to fight with some NCOs. He put hands on NCOs that when they came to correct him, and uh, First Sergeant Rob got involved. In fact, I was told explicitly to go wake up First Sergeant Rob if he did not cooperate. And I was like, I'm not really a snitch, but like this dude absolutely deserves what's coming his way.
Well, when you're in a war zone, man, I mean, that's a real thing. I mean, back in the day, 200 years ago, you fell asleep on duty, they might just shoot you. You know what I
Well, and
mean? And
as you
that's the
would find
truth.
out later, I mean, it's important to be paying attention on guard duty because we had the death blossom on
Yes,
Halloween,
we
right?
did.
Like some shit fucking went down, and I largely think it could have been avoided had somebody not been sleeping in whatever tower kicked all of that off, right?
Mhm. Oh, and that day is a cluster. That day lives in my memory often. I don't like Halloween. For real, I don't like Halloween. You could ask my wife, which sucks because my wife loves Halloween. I hate Halloween. But, uh but no, man, so that was the interesting thing was right off the get-go, and I think about this often, dude. I wasn't just fighting the enemy outside the wire. You know what I mean? It was it was rough, dude, and I mean, I'm not even trying to sound like a pussy. There were times I feared for my safety, like, in that tent. Now, what made the difference, man, was Norris slept right next to me, right? Norris was in our squad. He slept next to me. I knew he had my back. I had his back. And then Zazweda ended up telling me there was an informant in that tent who I know who it is now because me and him are good friends, Cameron Morris, who, he kind of kept things on the rails. He let the sergeants know when it was getting crazy, and I think there was talkings too that I didn't know about. You know what I mean? And so there was a point where it kind of chilled out. It kind of chilled out. It leveled out. Um, but yeah, man, that was kind of my initial thing. There was, well, shoot, man. Like I almost enjoyed being on mission because I'm not getting messed with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you just don't have to think about it. Watch your back. It's literally just do your job. And yeah, no, I get that. So let's talk about Buttrey and what impact that would have on you. I can start the story if you want because I kind of remember it. But if you've got the best version of the story, I don't. Again, I was part of the talk, right? I was running all kinds of
So
shit.
yeah,
So
I
for
can share my
me,
POV on it, and if you want to fill in the blanks, you can do that. Buttrey, I met for briefly like a day, because he was the chalk right before ours, about a week or two prior. So I think when we got there, like my first day, as a replacement, because it took about a week to get us wheels up, right? He was leaving that same day. So I met him briefly, but I barely remembered him, right? Well, we get there, and again, dude, you had four replacements in first platoon. Me and a Lundigan went to basic together. We were in the same platoon. And me and Daniker, we got along real good. So, even though I butted heads with a lot of the new guys, number one, there were old guys that treated me well. Number two, I had my replacement guys, like I had friends there. You know what I mean? I was never all alone. Um, I remember, man, Buttrey. And so, a little backstory personally about me. I was not that jockey douchebag in high school that went infantry, like a lot of people think is the stereotype. Dude, I had a very, rocky childhood, teenage years. I was the fat theater kid, okay, that got made fun of and bullied by the jocks, right? I was always in the outcast crowd. Um, my senior year, dude, I lost 100 pounds and I learned to be really mean, right? And all of a sudden, people quit messing with me, started getting, attention from the ladies, whatever, whatever. But I changed on a dime, man, when I was like 17, 18, like hard 180. Um, and so fast forward, I remember Brandon Buttrey. I remember having the thought. I said, "Wow, this is the first person I've ever met who gets it worse than I got it. Who gets bullied more than I get bullied, right?" And I remember feeling glad that I'm like, there's somebody that has it worse than me for once, right? And then it kind of peaked, man. I remember we all got woken up, middle of the night. The helicopter dropped off pallets of water or whatever, and so wanted all the junior enlisted form a chain. We were training it to a Connex or whatever. Buttrey was the one I was passing it to, right? And he's sitting there. No, fucking nobody wants to get woken up at 3 in the morning to undo this when we got a mission in 2 hours. It is what it is. But Buttrey's over there running his mouth, oh, this sucks. I'm tired. I'm this. Everybody's like, shut the fuck up, and oh, I'm tired. And I remember, dude, I turned and I started being a dick and I started throwing the water at him faster and harder, right? And I remember, man, it eventually I got to he couldn't keep up with it. I was moving too fast. And I remember I threw a case of water at him. Boom, dude, got him right in the face, right? Busted his lip real bad. And I remember, man, he almost started crying. And I was never the bully, you know what I mean? That had never been me. Um, and I mean, that was, and it sounds silly, dude, but that was like in my willful mind, my conscious mind, that was my first time ever willfully bullying somebody or being mean, right? For the sake of being mean. And it didn't sit right with me, man. You know, I remember going back and I said, "Dude, you made that guy cry. Like, you know, you busted his lip, you know." I felt bad, man. And so I remember it was like the next day you would always see Butchery sitting by himself. Like I never saw people in his platoon reel him in. You know, dude, Moros, we had guys that would not just let us sit by ourselves. You know what I mean? Even if they were fucking with us at night, right? It was just different. And I remember sitting out there smoking with Norris one day, looking at Butchery across the yard, and I said, "Norris," I said, "let's go be his friend." And he said, "Okay, let's do it." And so I remember me and Norris walked over to him, say, "Hey, what's up, man?" He was kind of like, "You're talking to me, right?" And we're like, "Yeah, dude, you know." And we just tell us about yourself, man. Tell us about your family, you know, where you come from. And we would smoke with the kid, right? Um, I think it also resonated because me and Daniker were the 2 youngest in 1st platoon. Daniker was a month younger than me. Butchery, I think he was a smidge older than me, but, you know, he was 19. So,
He was young, man.
he was
He
a month or
was
2 older than me, you know, and
what I remember of Buttrey is I felt like he was out of place in the infantry. I feel like he should have been doing something else. Like I don't know a whole lot of his backstory, but I assume he didn't grow up the greatest and didn't have the greatest life growing up. And now hearing what you're talking about, how he was treated when he got to Mushan, kind of starting to put two and two together, and it's starting to make a lot more sense because I did have a conversation with him right before that happened. I was out there with Purdy, and Purdy and I were talking to him. But that's just kind of what I did, though, is I talked to all you guys.
you would, and I remember your presence, you know, and here's the thing, right? And it's whether it's in the civilian world or the military, there's always, always, always that disconnect between up here and down here, right? And, you know, it's not good in civilian businesses, right? But for example, you go to a fucking war zone and it's the military and there's that disconnect and people die, right? And it happens, right? It's not anybody's fault, especially when somebody goes that route. But it's just it is what it is. Now let me tell you, man, do you remember all the graffiti on the towers?
No, dude. So that's I didn't have to ever go to the towers, but I was also very much running.
Dirty Duck, Butchery sucks dick, Dirty Duck, Ashy Larry, and it was all Butchery. There was graffiti in almost every tower about that kid. Um, you know, and they would make fun of his duck lips or whatever, you know, racial slurs. There was graffiti in every fucking tower about him. And uh-huh. And again, man, it was getting to that point where I was like, wow, he's getting it bad. Um and we became friends. And you know what's interesting, dude, is there were some similarities between us and vastly different things too. The similarity was he had wanted to be a soldier since he was a little kid. Now, here's what happened to me, and I joke with people. I say I thought it was gonna be Band of Brothers, and I got Starship Troopers, right? Is the example that I use, you know? But I think that's what happened to Buttrey. I think in his mind, he had this romanticized idea of what, you know, military service was, what it meant to be a service member, a soldier, a very idealistic kid, man. You know, he was very much an idealist. And he was one of like 10 foster kids who grew up in what I would sounds like a hyper religious home, right? Put in a bubble, homeschooled, right? And I think just like me and many other folks, he got out of Dodge as quick as he could, right? And he wanted to kind of start life. And he was very proud, man. He was proud to be a service member. And much like me, where I was like, this is what the fuck, right? You know, but he went a different direction with it. I got angry. I got cold, right? I got bitter. He went a different direction, right? And you know, man, it was interesting because, like I said, we would talk often, me and him. I became his friend probably the last month of his life. Um, you know, and to fast forward a little bit, and here's just my spotty bits, right? I'm gonna tell you right now, dude, and I know everybody this is a sore subject. What he did with Ramos's watch,
I
that
don't
was a
know
cry for
that
help.
story. What
Okay,
did he
that was
do?
so he stole Ramos's watch, which had Ramos's wedding band on it, and it came out and they made an announcement, hey, it's got his wedding band, whoever took it, just give it back, amnesty, leave it here, nobody will know who it was. Butcher goes, I took it, I did, Private Butchery, I took it, I have his watch, here it is, I'm sorry. And they said, well, you know what, we're stripping you down to E1 when you get back from Afghanistan, you're going to be on extra duty. I mean, they threw the book at him and nobody caught it for what it was. And I'm not making excuses for him, but I'm like, no, dude, that was a cry for help. I think he was trying to get kicked
Do
out of
you
the
see it
army,
as a
maybe.
cry for help
You know what I mean?
in hindsight now, or did you see it as a cry for help in the moment? Because I I didn't know that happened, right? But there were, looking back on the whole Buttery situation, I personally, with the few interactions I had with him, can see several different points where he needed more help than any of us on that cop were capable of giving him. I do believe that, with every fiber of my being, I don't think that any of us were equipped to help Brandon Buttery with what he needed in that
No,
moment.
and if anything, man, and I don't know, dude. I'm not at that. I never made NCO. I never was at the command level. I think he should have been one that somebody flagged, and probably should have went to ZBAD, to where behavioral health was, and um, it just, and it's sad, man, because you talk about failure to adapt. I would say Buttrey had a failure to conform. You know what I mean? Where he just, like I said, I, even as much as it was rough, we fit in. Buttrey just, and I don't know, man. Again, this was all outsider. I wasn't in third platoon. I don't know conversations in their tent, right? Buttrey was an odd guy. I just know what I saw, right? And so even then, dude, in the moment, I remember thinking, why did he do that? Even then, 19 years old, dumb as bricks, right? And I still was like, he didn't steal the watch just to steal the watch, right? You know what I mean? I was like, he had a watch. He didn't need a watch. Why did he do that? It was like almost like rebellious, like a teenager, like acting out. You know what I mean?
Well, and then to come clean immediately, right? Like I did it. It's me. I did this. Like, okay, right? Like that should have definitely been assigned to Peeler and Jones and Bonds, even all those dudes in
Well,
third platoon.
nobody ever expects people are going to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so I'll be honest with you, dude. I carried a lot of hatred for a lot of third platoon guys for a long time, and we'll get to that. I ended up, um, one of your boys who ended up, I think he got out as an E4, maybe he made five, right? One of the big guys that you talked about earlier, you said his name. I ended up almost fist fighting him on a range at Fort Lewis, and bro, all I got was yelled at. I didn't get smoked. I didn't get nothing. I blew up. Like, I got a lot of grace later on, dude. Once I got home, like a lot of grace, a lot of grace. I got away with shit I should not have gotten away with, which was cool being a Mushan guy, right? Like, but that was not good because I was an E4, bro, and you couldn't tell me shit. I was that E4 by the time I made rank, dude. Like, I was salty. I was part of the drawdown. They were pushing me out so quick. We'll get to all that, right?
I can remember a little bit of that about you, particularly after we got home. But I think we were all like that, to be honest, man. That deployment did something to all of us, whether we want to
Oh, I
admit it
was.
or
Oh, I'll
not.
get to that, dude. Yeah, no. I can tell you right where the switch flipped, but no, with Buttrey. So that happened, and then I remember talking to him. So what's happening? Oh, they told me when I get home, I'm gonna be E1. They're gonna have me on extra duty. I was like, ah, it sucks, man, but hang in there, da da da. Then, we had done a suicide awareness training just a few weeks prior, I think, and I paid somewhat attention, but I remember, man, Buttrey, because he got in trouble, he was on the first chalk out of there, right? They had set him on the first chalk. And at this point in the deployment, everybody was starting to run out of everything. Cigarettes were low. And so I remember it was at that point, dude, where we're like, fuck, everybody's out of cigarettes. And it was hard trying to bum smokes. Okay. And this will come into play in a second. But I remember I used to always ask Saunders, hey, Saunders, can I get some cigarettes? Nah, fuck you. He would never let me have his cigarettes. And I'm like, okay.
Smart man.
um, well, Saunders, and that's another, him and Rowdy, they set me up so many times, bro. Like, literally set me up. I remember one time, and this is graphic, but Row wiped his butt with my sleeping bag, and somehow I'm the one that got smoked for it. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I couldn't do right in Afghanistan. I could not win for losing. And so anyway, then he was part of that bunch, and so I didn't trust him, at all. Um, Fast forward, Buttree's leaving the next day, dude. He had, it was the next day. So now we're November 4th, okay, 2012. And I remember he said, "Hey, Boyd, I'm leaving tomorrow. Here's some cartons, man. Here's some cartons of smokes." Because I remember I said, "Why is he giving me all of this shit?" Right? I remember that's the red flag went up in my stomach. Like, why is he giving me all of his things? He gave me some gloves. He gave me like a lot of stuff. Right? And I said, like, "Whoa, why are you giving me all of this, man?" He goes, "Well, I'll be in Kandahar tomorrow, dude. I'll go to the boardwalk and get more cigarettes." I'm like, okay, that tracks, right? I'm like, okay,
It does track because that's pretty common. You don't have a lot of room to carry a lot of shit, right? So you're pawning shit off to people who are replacing you. I thousands of dollars over 4 deployments of books that I just left behind for others because I didn't have room for it to take it. Right? I would leave cigarettes because I'm going back to a main fob at that point. I can buy cigarettes over there anyway that are probably better than the shitty Miamis or whatever we were
exact
smoking.
Senecas or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, there you
But
go. Yeah.
no, man. So, I said, okay, whatever. And what bugs me, dude, is to this day I can't remember. Oh, now we're starting to get there. We're starting to get to the emotional part. I can't remember who asked who. But I want to say it was around midnight. And somehow Buttrey and I ended up going to the chow hall together. I don't know if I asked him. I think he might have said something to me, "Void, can we go get Pop Tarts?" And I said, "Sure, dude, let's go." And so I remember sitting with him in the chow hall by ourselves, drinking some Rippets or whatever. And he said something to me that haunts me to this day. He said, "Boyd, I don't want to die out here a virgin." And I said, "Butcher, you're going home tomorrow, dude. What are you talking about?" You know? And I remember even telling him, I said, "Bro, go home and lie, dude. Tell him you were a fucking war hero. Get laid." you know? I said, "You know what? Come on, we're going home, man. We're going home. I'm jealous of you. I've got 2 or 3 more weeks here. You're leaving tomorrow, man." And I didn't catch it. You know what I mean? I didn't catch it. That was one of those hindsight things. Was why did he I remember it stood out as odd to me. I was like, why the fuck would he say that? And Peter's like, there was some morning, I think it crosses every infantryman's mind intrusively at one point, where I woke up after being terribly abused and I'd look at my saw and I'd say, "There's my ticket out." But I was like, I don't want that ticket. I want to go home. You know what I mean? Um, and so I didn't pay any mind to it because again, it's like it is what it is. And so we had that last supper, if you will, and I went back to the tent. Well, I get shaken awake 4 hours later by Brandon Saunders, and he's shaking me. And I was like, "Hey, fuck off," and "Hey, Boyd," laughing. "Hey, man, your friend just killed himself." I mean, just smiling and laughing. And I told him, I said, "Who, what?" And he goes, "Buttrey. Buttrey just blew his brains out." And I said, "Hey, man, that's not funny. You shouldn't joke about that." And I remember rolling over and he said, "Boyd, I'm not joking. Do you want to come smoke a cigarette with me?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck." Cause Saunders never offered to let me smoke with him. And I don't know why that him saying that made it real. My eyes kind of went wide. And I walked out of the tent and this was about 4:05, 4:10. I mean, this is as they're taking him off the tower. You know what I mean? And so I stepped out there and I see the cop awake, right? Lights on. And I see Ramos and all of them running him in, blood all over him, like I saw it all, from a distance. And somebody, I don't know if Saunders had walked over, somebody was like, "Hey, man, you want to go see him?" And I was like, "Fuck no, dude. I don't want to go see him." Like I don't even know what I was. I was raw. I was in shock. And then I remember, I think I sat out on the porch smoking, I think, until the medevac bird came, or left. And I never at any point went into the thing. And, you hear about secondhand trauma, very quickly, maybe even while we were there, I had people that were there describe to me in detail, what it looked like, what was happening. Um, and the gagging and stuff like that, dude. And just, I don't know, again, knowing that was my buddy, right? Or an acquaintance. I call him a friend. I only knew him for 4 months of my life, 3 months of my life. But man, that messed with me. And so I can remember the next morning, um, or that morning when sun came up, dude, everybody, that's when they two people to a tower, you know what I mean? It was this whole thing. I remember, dude, I was just 1,000 yard stare, man. And I remember Audie came up to me and he said, "Hey Boyd, is that the first friend that you've had that's died?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And without skipping a beat, he said, "Well, if the longer you stay in the infantry, the more that'll happen. Get used to it." All right. And he didn't mean it in a bad way at all, more of a matter of fact way, and I remember that was the moment in my head. I said, I don't want to stay in the infantry. I loved my time in the army up until November 5th, 2012. And even then, dude, I mean, I didn't like how I was getting treated by people, but that was the November 5th, 2012. I said, well, shit, I've got 2.5 more years on my contract and I just want this thing to be done. Right. Um, I remember I got stuck on a tower that day with Chow, but you know,
Ignore one.
I'll plead the fifth on that one. But yeah, man, I remember him trying to console me, dude. And I can remember wanting, and Chow, dude, Chow and Navarro were close, or Chow thought the world of Navarro, and that was very obvious. And so, he was trying to console me, and Boyd, I know how it feels. And I believed him. And I remember this was Peters. I remember wanting to cry and I couldn't. I remember that was the first, well, not, I don't know. That was the first time I really remember I need to cry. I need to cry, but I can't. Right. I was like, I just can't. Like, I want to cry and I just can't. I'm just fucking angry and I want to kill people. You know what I mean? Um,
I get it, man, because you've just painted a bigger picture for me because my last memory of Butchery is him standing out there ready to go to guard, asking me for a cigarette and smoking a cigarette with the kid. And I didn't have nearly the interaction with the kid that you did, but I was also in a million directions at deployment, right? Like doing my job, taking care of everybody that I could take care of, everything. At that time, getting everybody ready to go home. And then, I don't know, an hour later, I'm in the aid station, and I'll spare you all of what I was doing in there, but definitely the stories you heard about what was going on. I mean, dude, at one point I was watching them do CPR on him, standing behind his head, putting his brains back in his skull, like and for those listening, Butchery, he was a black kid, and he was so white. He's whiter than you and me at that point, and
I think he was mixed. I think he was mixed ethnicity. But right there, he had a foster mom and dad, so he didn't even know his
yeah,
bio
and I
parents.
mean, just everything you heard, I'm sure is yeah, and I remember sitting there like, now I've got to deal with this, right? Because it's on me. I don't even know why I'm still awake at 3 a.m. because I burning the candle at both ends at that point or whatever. But now I've got to take care of. Okay, fuck, man, we got battalion calling. This is a crime scene. Like, what's going on? We're taking the tower down and burning it because we can't put people back in the tower, with shit all over it.
Well,
And
let me
like,
tell you more of
God,
my
dude.
perspective, right? Because again, I'm just a fucking kid who'd been in the army less than a year at this point, right? Um, freaking so fast forward, fast forward, um, a detail goes out to for the tower. Okay. And this was like the next night. I go up to Z, and I don't blame him for this at all. But I go up to Z, I go to parade arrest, and this is the only time, Peters. I said, Sergeant, I said, please put somebody else on this detail. I said, dude, they stuck me on KP. That's another thing. I did KP every time First Platoon had KP. I was on it. So much so that Shaw was hooking me up. I almost got in trouble for that. They thought I was stealing from the chow hall. Shaw told me, I feel bad for you. You were getting hazed. Here, man, at least I can make it worth your time, right? And he would hook me up and give me soda cases. I mean, he was so nice to me, man. And I got in trouble. They thought I was trying to steal it, and I had to tell them. I said, "No, Shaw gave me this," and they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because he feels bad that you all put me on KP every single day." And they were like, "Oh," you know. But no, man. So, oh shit, where was I even going with that one? The tower detail. So I go to parade rest and I said, Sergeant Z, I said, I can do KP the rest of the time. I said, please, I've never asked to not do something. I said, please, I'm one of the only people on this cop that was friends with this kid. Can you please put somebody else on this detail? He sat there, man, and he smoked the dog shit out of me for 15, 20 minutes. You don't ever tell a sergeant you're not going to do something, this and that, and smoke the shit out of me. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, at least this is I'm paying for not going. And then it gets done and he goes, now get your ass to that fucking detail. And I said, Roger that. And so by the time I get over there, most of it was already done. There was still a couple sandbags that had some bio on them. Um, but that was it, man. It was, I'm sitting over there sifting sandbags, just fuck my life. You know what I mean? Like, fuck my life. I don't have another word for it. Like my brain, part of my brain, dude, is still in Mushan, you know, and truly. And it sounds a little dramatic, but like part of me died there, dude. Like an innocent part of me died there. Ooh, sniper kitty, and that's the one. Part of me died there, dude. I hate cats, Peters. I fucking hate cats. Okay, I hate cats, and yet that cat was like one of the only bright joys I had at that cop. I would all the bullshit I was dealing with, man. I'd have hard missions. I'd pick that stupid cat up. I would feed him the tuna MREs. I would pet him. I loved that cat. And then I remember when all that went down, I said, well, fuck my life. I can't have anything good here. I was like, there's no happiness, no joy, no innocence, no anything, just fucking hatred and death and killing. Right.
I want you to know, man, it's not a dramatic thing or whatever because a large part of me died there as well. For those listening, like Mushan changed 100 dudes' lives in a not so great way. I mean, there's no wonder that we all struggle with the things that we struggle with. When we transition out, which we're moving into your transition, because you didn't have much of a career after Afghanistan. So Butchery's fresh in your mind, and then Cantu is a year and a half later, right as you're getting out, right? So you're carrying that into your transition. So, you've got this innocent part of you that is completely dead at this point, right? Like, and you don't understand it because you're what, 20 maybe? You're 19 years old. And similar story for me with my first deployment, I was 18 and I wouldn't turn 19 until I got home. Like, you know what I mean? Or maybe it was, yeah, yeah. And you've got this, you don't know how to make sense of this, right? And I think this makes even more sense to you now with what you do in your professional life and your business. You know, 19-year-old kid's brain is not even all the way fully formed. You're not self-aware at that point. You are very malleable into whatever the army wants you to be and the attitude and personality they want you to have and the mission. And now you're dealing with this, somebody, this is your first experience with like a serious loss, I would assume, right? Like, barring parents or whatever, cousins, uncles, growing up, like,
I had a great grandma that passed when I was 15. Other than that, and even that was sad, but no death, no
well, in
personal
particularly
experience.
violent death by one's own hand. That's a whole nother monster, right? Like dealing like with that. Cause I remember thinking to myself, and I'll be very upfront and honest and open and vulnerable about this. I, for a long time, had zero empathy for Butchery because I looked at suicide as just the worst fucking thing that you as a human being can do, not only to yourself but to others. It's selfish. You don't realize how many other people you're hurting. And I was sitting there thinking, like, dude, you're going home tomorrow. You're going home tomorrow. Like, I don't give a shit how bad it is. Now, I have since grown as a person and understand that everybody battles their own demons. And it's a large part of why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now. Like, the whole point of this show is to get in front of veterans so that they can see that there's a
I
way
felt the
out,
same
right?
way, man.
That
And
you,
I cared about the guy, and I was fucking mad at him, bro. I had nightmares for years, dude, where I would talk to him and I'd say, "Why did you do what you did?" Like I would have conversations with him. It was heavy. But I was fucking angry because like that's kind of why I said what I said about the intrusive thoughts. Like, hey man, we all have intrusive thoughts, but like they're just thoughts. They don't have to become action. Right? Look at Aries is tripping me out.
that's awesome, dude. It's awesome, man. It's good
Aries.
entertainment.
Yeah, he's
But so let's talk about what was the decision for you to get out. And man, this is gold. I enjoy this conversation so much. We're an hour and 15, 17 minutes in here, and we're getting into your transition, which is, I call it the transition hole. So many of us fall into it and we never get out, right? And then we end up with more butchery incidents than we care to talk about. again why I started the show, because picking up my phone to notifications, like, you remember Sergeant Woods?
Oh, yeah, I remember Woods. I remember when that happened.
Sergeant Woods taking his own life, man. He's the last person on the face of this
Usually the ones
earth.
you don't think.
Sergeant first, yeah, brother,
Magura is one
and
that bothered me, a riot.
and Sergeant Woods particularly impacted me because as I was getting out and dealing with my own transition issues, he covered for me a lot. My transition could have been a lot different. I could have lost everything with all the drinking I was doing and the shit. And Sergeant First Class Woods, Wesley Woods, he had my back. I don't have enough words to explain how good of a leader that man was, but yeah, dude. So let's talk about, what made you decide to get out. I think you alluded to it earlier when you said, I don't want to be in the infantry anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This is not what I'm called to do. So coming home, did you know you were going to get out?
I knew I think I was kinda pretty "fuck the army" after no after Buttrey, and it's relevant to the transition. So me and Norris both, man, I remember we FaceTimed, and it was funny, bro, because I was still a minor, man, but I was drinking at Manas, I was working it to where I could drink them Bottega 9s, but,
Baltica number 9, 9%
bro,
alcohol by
and
volume.
after
Yep.
Bouchard, I mean, I remember feeling euphoria. I remember feeling joy. Me and Norris were buzzed, and I remember we FaceTimed my parents.
You remember how cold it was there?
Yeah, dude. Oh, we were in the
You remember the
Trans-Siberian
showers?
blizzard, literally.
You remember do you remember the
Yes,
showers?
I remember ice on the
The
inside on the
ice.
tents, dude. Yes, there was ice everywhere. I got put on baggage detail, bro, which that is to this day, I tell people that's almost the coldest I've ever been. It was like -30 with wind chill, and I remember the Air Force guy told us, he said, "Y'all cycle out under the exhaust of the plane," because he said, "You will freeze. Y'all will go to sleep and not wake up," you know? You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you, it was so cold, you know? And so anyway, what's relevant is me and Norris, we were on the trail, dude. We were trail. We were with First Sergeant Rob. We were the only two privates on our chalk. We were the last bunch, man, which was good and bad. Okay. The negative, obviously, when it came time for a detail, well, you only had two privates, right? Good part was, man, they ran a lot of interference to where they didn't need privates from 1, 2, 3. You know what I mean?
First Sergeant Rob was good at that, man, and you guys weren't the last ones because I was behind First Sergeant Rob by a week and a half. Yeah, but I that was a cool experience, man, because I was all alone. Like, it was just me, old Staff Sergeant Peters, running around just doing whatever he wants on Rear Vaughn, which was awesome. I enjoyed the shit out of that. But the small victories, right? Like, nobody to tell me what to do. I got respect, right? So, like, I'm just in
It
charge
was
of
really
myself.
chill, man, because again, me and Norris got away with a lot because when we got treated like big boy rules, you know what I mean? Which was cool. And it was in Kyrgyzstan. It was right when because they called us off like 3 or 4 times, dude. Hey, we're going and we're in customs line, and hey, turn around, we're not going today. Four times. So the running joke was, we're never leaving. We're never leaving. This is just what they're gonna do. Um, but, no, it was funny because Norris had to go to take a piss. I remember we're sitting in the freaking holding area, and he goes, "Hey, man, I gotta go to the bathroom." I said, "Okay, dude." And then I look over at all of our NCOs, and they said, "Let me get all the chalk leaders." And I was like, "Oh, shit." And I remember slumping down in my chair because Norris isn't there yet. And I look over, they're starting to look, and I'm trying to slump down, and I just hear, "Boyd." And I was like, "Dang it." And "You're on baggage detail." I said, "All right." And so Norris came back. "I hope you enjoyed your piss, man." you know and so it was cool though. We got to fly first class. If you were on baggage detail, they stuck you up on the top of the plane, which was cool. Um, but when we landed, and this is relevant, okay, I remember, man, you had all them guys, Rouse on, and you had so many guys, man, their parents flew up. Well, me and Norris, man, we called home, and neither of us could have any family come up when we were landing. And I remember that really, really bummed both of us out. And so I remember after we all land, it was all cool, dude. You're with your boys, right? But then everybody's hugging and kissing their wives. People's parents are there. Everybody's happy, and now it's all right. Bye. See you Monday. And we didn't have anybody, dude. Me and Norris were just in our shitty uniform from Kyrgyzstan, had our bags, and I remember we looked at each other, and he said, "Do you want to call the taxi, or do you want me to?" And I said, "Oh, we'll figure it out." And I remember I think it was him. He said, "You want to go get some whiskey?" And I said, "Let's do it, man." So I jokingly always said like Jack and Jim were our welcome home. You know what I mean? And I remember, man, I used to drink. I was a drinker. I'm from Texas, right? I remember even in Fourth Brigade, dude, I'd beer pong on the weekends, right? But it was different. It was different. And I remember when I came home from Mushan, it was different. Then I started drinking straight whiskey. 19 years old, man, by myself in the barracks. I would be killing it. And I remember my sergeants, my NCOs gave me permission. They said, Boyd, they said, you've deployed now. Um, I'm not telling you you can drink, but I'm not going to get you in trouble for it. But you better be smart. You know what I mean? I remember being told that.
That's very much an unwritten rule that we kind of all follow, at least my whole career. I always thought that was the dumbest thing in the world. You went to war and now you can't drink. Like, just be smart. That was the stipulation, right? Just be smart about it, because then you're forcing my hand if you go and do something stupid, right?
And
Usually it's a
Audie was a
DUI.
very big boy rules kind of guy. You know what I mean? He would treat you.
I
I do
love
too.
Nate Audie. He's
He is
great.
awesome. I love him. But yeah, he would treat you like a man until you gave him reason not to. Right. Um, and so I remember, dude, lots of drinking, lots of drinking. When everything changed after I got back, man, I was killing handles of bourbon whiskey to myself in 3 or 4 days from the time I was 19 and up. Freaking Woodhouse, man, one night. Boyd, what are you doing tonight? Same old, dude. I'm gonna be in the bees. Oh, come hang out with me. I want to take you somewhere. This mofo took me to AA, bro. I was 19 years old or 20, and he's dragging me to an AA meeting, right? And I was like, I felt cheated. I was like, what the fuck's going on here? You know what I mean?
You thought you were going to party and he's dragging you to AA. You're like, yeah, this is definitely not going to
Literally, dude.
stick.
I was like, what's happening? Um, bro, and substance, and we could make a whole podcast on that, dude. I was real messed up my last 2 years in the army. I ended up somebody narked on me, dude, and I got called into CID, but an NCO hooked me up and said, Boyd, you need to go to ASAP today before CID pulls you in tomorrow. You know what I mean? Um, Guy that I consider like a father figure, who was my squad leader for 2 years. Well, we talked about him at the beginning of the cast. Well, and I'm gonna tell you who narked on me, okay, was one of those guys who might have wiped his butt with my sleeping bag. Okay. And I'll never forget squad leader saying, I don't respect a snitch, Boyd. I don't respect a snitch. And he told me, but
That's very much that squad leader's demeanor
it
too.
was, dude, it was. And so he got me into ASAP, and he said, Boyd, this is your 1 foot out the door, man. You drink, you're out the army, right? Which again, dude, I pushed that limit, dude, and I'm so blessed, Peters. I'm not even talking shit. I am so blessed that I had NCOs that stuck their necks out for me. Because, dude, I should have been kicked out the army many times, man. I got caught red. I saw this squad leader kick people out for far less. I saw him do it. And that's what I'm saying when I got special treatment. And I don't mean it in a braggadocious way. I mean it in I'm grateful, because I remember Townsend told me, dude. He told me once. He said, "Boyd, you got the PTSD." He said it just like that. He said it just like that. You got the PTSD, Boyd. And he said, "Man," he said, "it's just we're trying to get you to that place. You ETS and you live your life." And he told me, man, he said, "Boyd, you go to the VA, you put in your claim." And he said, "You know what? All these guys that fucked with you," he said, "you can be laughing at, as you cash that check every month." I remember I looked up to him like a father, dude. Between him and Potter, they were father figures to me, right? Oh, Potter, dude. Me and Norris got in a scrap once in the barracks. That's what I was talking about. And Potter made us go sweep rocks in the parking lot. You know what I mean? But they gave me and Norris we always had high risk soldier counselings. And I remember we asked why, and they said, well, stuff from the deployment, and we know what y'all are about. And I said, oh, okay. Me and Norris were exceptional field soldiers. Okay. We were the shittiest garrison soldiers, but dude, anytime Norris was 1-1, I was 1-4. You know what I mean? Like, LTs in 1-1. You had, we were the guys, dude. And it was Boyd and Norris, man. We got shit done, right? Play hard, work harder, or work hard, play harder, right? But yeah, man. So moving towards the transition, had a lot of people looking out for me. Like I said, I got into it with a few people from the deployment, and I got slaps on the wrist for so much stuff. But I never got UCMJ. the entire time I was in. Norris had him a company grade at one point. I never did, and yet I lost my good conduct medal. I'm gonna tell you why. Okay, towards the end of the time I got out in May of 15, bro, I was one of maybe 10 soldiers in ACO that had deployed to Mushan. Literally
You
May of
got out when?
15.
Okay, so you got out what 6 months before I did because I got out in November. But I was also gone from the company. They exiled me to range control, and really it was kind of nice because what was the first sergeant that replaced Rob? I
Well,
can't
there's a
remember
couple. Are
his
you talking
name.
about
The
Charles
Islander
Pittman
guy.
though?
Yes, that man. I owe that man a lot because he was like, here's the deal, dude. Like, your med board's taking extremely a long time. And come to find out, it's because he kept losing my orders in digital land. Like, they were switching the systems over in the med board, whatever. He's like, I got to send you to range control. And then he had to bring me back from range control because my med board was taking so long. And when that happened, he was like, the only spot I can put you is back in the training room with an E5 in charge of you. He's like, I'm not going to do that. He's like, I have no reason to believe you're going to do
Hubbard would have been
anything.
your boss. Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely not going to happen after I led him
Right.
in a
Right.
platoon, right? So, so he was like, "Can you be here every Monday morning for formation, and you just go do whatever you want the rest of the week? If I call you, you come in." I was like, "Yeah, I think I
Bro,
can handle that."
Pittman hooked me up,
And
dude. I answered to Pittman my last 3 months in the Army. He told me, "Boyd, here is my cell phone number. You answer to me now." And I was like, "Roger
yeah,
that."
yeah, I think he was just as done as we were though, too, because he was on his way
He
out
told I
as
don't care, I'll
well.
say this. He told me, he said, "Boyd, you know what, ASAP, I would Boyd, when I get out the Army, I'm probably gonna smoke weed, but we're in the Army right now." He told me that. He said, "But we're in the Army.
yeah,
We
yeah,
can't smoke weed in the
yeah,
Army." I was like,
yeah.
"Roger that, First Sergeant." You know? But he was a good guy. I've always wanted to find him, but no, man, so what happened was, basically, because I got fat, dude. I got stuck on gate guard for a month, right, at Fort Lewis, and I got fat, dude. I got real fat, and I got married around the same time to somebody I had.
Well, that's what drinking does to you. For those of you who don't know, the amount of alcohol that we were consuming, and I was consuming just as much at the same period of time that you were doing. I was 2 gallons of Seagram 7 a week, not including what I was drinking at the bar, right? That's and Seagram 7 just because it was cheap and I like 7 and 7s, right? So when you're drinking 2 gallons a week at $30 a fucking half gallon, it gets expensive real quick on top of what you're spending at the bar. But I was getting fat too. And I had already had two shoulder surgeries, which was putting me out, right? So of course, you remember walking around for an entire year in a sling. You didn't see me out of a sling for a year because it was so bad, and I was getting fat because I was drinking just as much too. It had nothing to do with eating. It was the amount of alcohol we were pouring down our
Around that
throats.
time, because I remember I had just made E4 a few months prior, right? After everybody got back from NTC, because that was that Op 4 rotation, um, we had Sergeant First Class M, who had freshly been promoted to E7, right? And then Lieutenant Rambo. Okay. And here's my thing. They hated my guts, dude. And I don't have very, very kind things to say about those two either. Right. I watched them rip my platoon apart. Right. They were looking for reasons to kick people out. And if you're looking for reasons, you're going to find them anytime, any day. Again, I'm thinking, where are all my old leaders? Zueda, where were the tough guys that they'll smoke the dog shit out of you, but then they're going to mentor you. Then they're gonna explain to you. They care about you. You know what I mean? They're hard on you because they care about you, right? It wasn't the same with those guys, and I never would have wanted to go to war with them, right? And so Townsend, I don't know. Do you remember what happened with him? One of the last thing he did was he put me in a team leader slot. That was one of the last things he did, and he said, "Boyd," and it meant a lot to me coming from him because he treated me like a stress ball at times. And he even told me, he said, "Boyd, I want to say something. I've used you like a stress ball." And I said, "I know you have." You know, he said, "But Boyd, I would pin E5 on you, and I would give you a fire team, and I would take you to Iraq, Afghanistan. I would go overseas with you." And dude, those words right there, I tell my parents or I tell civilians, they don't understand what those words mean, right? Coming from this warfighter, this man who had been a staff sergeant since I was in a sixth grade desk, to tell me that he would pin sergeant on me and give me a fire team. There is no higher honor coming from an infantry squad leader. You know what I mean? And to come from him, that meant a lot. And so Anyway, man, he gave me this gun team. I was a Bravo gun team leader, and I loved it, man. I loved it. I had these, I loved mentoring. I loved leading. I loved teaching, right, and training. Again, I was shit at Garrison, but I was good at my FMs, my TMs. I was good at the doing part, right? Uh
The
huh.
gun
Oh, bro,
drills on the hill right outside the
yes,
company in the
dude.
mud.
I loved weapon squad. So I spent my last 2 years in the army in weapon squad, right? Whether
I remember coming out there and hanging out with you guys every now and again, giving you pointers,
Townsend
blah
one
blah
time, dude,
blah.
me and
Yeah, oh yeah.
Tavella and we were the vehicle crew. We outperformed the gun teams on the gun drills. I remember
Yeah,
Townsend was
yeah.
just impressed with us. And um fast forward, man, again, I'm married, playing house. Again, a good friend of mine later on, going through my divorce, he said, "Boyd, you always go for party girls, and then you get mad when party girls do what party girls do." And there was a lot of truth to that. All right. My my career, Norris, everybody said I went downhill when I got married. Right. She added so much stress to my life and drama. And man, it just nope, didn't do well for me. Well, then fast forward to December, and so this is what happened was I ripped my shoulder during those months from like summer to fall. You
I
did. You
told you.
warned me at the gym
I
at
told you.
Mushan. You
I
said, "Boyd,
warned
if you
you,
keep
dude.
doing it like that, you're gonna tear your shoulders." And what's funny, dude? It was during that freaking one range that we ran squad lead iterations all the way till the morning, where the striker and the RPG. Do you remember that? And
Oh
dude,
yeah.
they were subbing me in.
Yeah.
They gave me a freaking saw that night because they were and they had me, Boyd, you're going again. You're going again. I was just going out with different squad leads for them to certify, right? And it was one of those night ranges, and freaking nods were down and depth perception. And I'm coming up the berm, and this is live fire too, right? I'm coming up the berm, and I see a big old pothole, big hit hole. And I said, "Oh boy, let me step over that hole," right? So depth perception, let me step over it. I step right into the hole, right? On a live
Every time.
fire range with a saw, and I'm front flipping, bro. I'm
Ass over tea
I'm
kettle.
rolling down this berm, and I'm like, "Oh god, like don't shoot your face off," right? And I remember when I come to, I go to lift my gun up and my right arm's not working. Right? Like my right arm is not working. And I'm like, "Oh, this is bad. This is bad." Like I just couldn't feel it, right? It's not working. And I remember the RSO was behind me. It was god, who was it Native American or no Islander? Y, Sergeant Y. Eithmar,
Sergeant
yes, he was
Ithmar.
behind me,
Yeah.
on the range, and I remember I said, Sergeant Wide." He came over, I said, "My arm's not working," and he goes, "What?" I said, My arm is not working," and he said, "Okay, just."
Do you know who do you know who he had to have come take care of that? That was my platoon. Yeah, I was the one that ran that platoon, not Sergeant Y. Sergeant Y, not
My
great,
last
man.
squad
Not
leader was Hickman. I don't know if you knew him. I did all the counselings for the squad. I wrote all of the counselings, and he would just sign them. That was weird, writing my own counseling, but
yeah. I don't wanna badmouth anybody here. That's not the point of that. But yeah, I remember I didn't know that it was you who had torn the shoulder, but I remember Sergeant Y coming back and be like, "We got a guy hurt out here on the live fire range. What do I do?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, what do you do? It's no different than fucking combat, bro. Nine line that shit. Like, let's figure this
right.
out." Like,
They pulled me, I mean, because we were almost done, so we finished. I just walked it. I just carried the saw with my arm limp, right? And I remember, dude, like we finished, and I went over to him, and I was like, "Guys, I'm hurt." And it was like morning, 5, 6 a.m., and they were just like, "Well, Boyd, go home and rest." That was all it started with. Go home and rest. I'm like, okay. So I go home, and I remember, dude, like I remember that morning, dude, I just crashed on my couch when I got to my apartment. I didn't even go to my bed. I just out, right? And I remember waking up, dude, my shoulders is not good. And I remember I still had to do PT. I still had to do things, right? I remember trying to do push-ups, and I just couldn't do, something was just not right, right? And so dude, that was a cluster, bro. I went to aid station. I never went to the aid station. And then I went to the aid station like 10 times my last 3 months, right? Um and so I remember going, and they ran me through the ringer, bro. They gave me a light PT profile, and they were like, "Yeah, just stretch." I said, "Something's wrong." Finally, when it wasn't better, "All right, we're going to send you to physical therapy." I said, "You don't even know what's wrong. You're sending me to physical therapy." Then they did acupuncture on my shoulder. I think that made it worse, right? It hurt real bad.
This is what you're talking about is a testament to something that you alluded to a little earlier in our conversation about ACO was one thing while we were deployed, and then it got ripped apart. That whole battalion got ripped apart after we got back, and the turnover, it literally, and I don't say this like as a point of ego or whatever, but it was well known on all of JBLM that ACO 123 during before, during, and just shortly after the Afghanistan deployment, we were the unit. We were the standard for the army, basically. That unit was shit high. It's the best unit I
One of
was
the
ever a part
highest,
of
most
in
decorated
my,
regular infantry units on Fort Lewis.
and then it gets shredded and you're dealing with stuff like this because I tore my shoulder. Who even knows when I tore it, but it finally went after we got home, and I walked right into the aid station, which I never did ever. You know, right? I just sucked it up, drive on, and Captain Barker was still in charge of the aid station. What an awesome dude that guy was. Interesting man. But I walked in there and I was like, "Hey, sir, I got a problem." And he just looked at my shoulder and he's like, "I think I know what it is." He's like, "Do me a favor, stand at parade rest." I was like, "Can't do that." He's like, "You can't put your left arm behind your back, can you?" I said, "No." He said, "Fuck." And he sent me straight to the hospital, and I had an MRI that afternoon. And that's the kind of leadership we had shortly after the deployment, but it sounds like it had already turned over by the time you're
Yeah.
going
No,
through
it
it.
was because I was at the end. This was fall of 14, right? Fall of 14, going into winter of 14, 15. They gave me the ringer finally, dude. I went on Christmas leave. Okay. And they told me, well, Boyd, if it's not better after Christmas, we'll cross that bridge. Christmas leave, found out my ex-wife was cheating on me, right? And so I remember, dude, I couldn't sleep, bro. That was when everything I was already crumbling, you know. I know this is a thing in Yakima, October. I got my smoking privileges taken away from me, because, and I'll be honest, dude, I was going hard on a kid. But I remember, dude, one time when I was a private, I kicked my helmet in anger, and I remember my NCO grabbed me by my vest. I mean, you know what I mean? I had the old school, and now we're in this new school soft army, right? And I remember all the sergeants came to the E4s, make them right or we're going to make y'all right. So we went out there handling business, right? And these privates, bro, they had an attitude. I remember like fall of 14, I was like, my God, I never would have had this attitude. I mean, when I came out of basic, your squad leader was demigod, right?
Well, I want to paint a picture here. So, what you're talking about, I had buddies on the trail that I had served with in previous deployments, and I was calling them like, "What the fuck are you sending us right now?" Because we had dudes in ACO that were being sent to us who could not pass push-ups. You have to do 42 in 2 minutes. If you can't do 42 in 2 minutes, I'm 40 years old, have two bad shoulders, right? Need one replaced. Just had a back surgery, and I can crank out 42 push-ups in about 30 seconds right now, right? Like there's no reason. And I'm calling my buddies on the trail like, "Hey, what the fuck are you sending us?" And he's like, "Look, dude, the army says it's the unit's responsibility." And I was like, "These people shouldn't be in the army." Like, so that's what we were dealing with. But let's talk about, you're out now. And did you go through the med board with the shoulder, or did you have to get your ratings after you
I
got
got
out?
screwed. Okay. I came through. Hey, you're frozen, by the way, on my end.
Uh I'm not froze. You're good. Everything seems to be good. So we'll just keep rolling with it. And if we if we have to do a part two, we'll
It's
do
all
a part
good.
two. Fuck it.
So I got screwed, man, because, well, and that's my whole point. It all culminated at the very end, with the mental health. I went to behavioral health the first day back from Christmas leave. I hadn't slept in 4 or 5 days, right? And that was kind of the infidelity going on, right? I just lost my marbles. I remember telling somebody, I said, Boyd's gone, you know, clocked out. You
Checked
know?
out. See ya.
Um, and it was at that point because I knew, I was like, "Man, you go to behavioral health, you ain't gonna be an infantryman anymore, right?" And I just was like, "I'm gonna die if I don't," right? And so I knew I needed to go. I was dealing with the shoulder stuff. Then I ended up getting an abscess on my neck that had to be surgically removed. So, Peters, I went from never going to sick hall to having 3 profiles, okay? I had a no shave profile as a white man. I had a mental health, couldn't work past 16 or 1800, profile. Then I had a dead man profile for my shoulder. So my last 3 months in the army, dude, 4 months in the army, I stayed home more than I was on base.
which is probably not ideal given what you're going through at that
Exactly, dude.
point.
Nothing good, you know? And
So that's perpetuating like what your
well, then
transition's going
M
to
and
be
Rambo
like.
started telling they told guys, "Stay away from Boyd. Boyd's toxic. Boyd's cancer, stay away from him." So now I'm being extra isolated, right? From even my unit, my buddies. Um and so that added to, I think, the difficulty of that transition to not even have that support. And then M, man, I remember M told me, he said, "I don't know who promoted you to E4, but you're the worst specialist I've ever met in the army." Right. And I remember saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way, Sergeant," Um, or I think I might have even said, "Somebody before you must not have thought the same," something like that. Cause he was dogging on my favorite NCOs, guys who, were dads to me, dogging on them. He was just so unprofessional, man. Um, Ceremoniously, he tried to chapter me out of the army like 30 days out from my ETS date. He literally dropped a chapter packet that literally never made it past the training room. First sergeant got it and called me in, and he said, "Boyd, this is shit." And he said, "Listen, I know who that guy is, and here's my number. You answer to me from now on, right?" Um, but it was bad, and all they could get me on, man, was right. They got me for being out of height and weight, right? And it came down to this thing where I didn't go to JAG on it, and I probably should have. I was just kind of like F it. But every time I would go to appeal and I would drop a letter, they would tell me they'd kick it back and they would tell me, "No, we're not taking this appeal. You need to rewrite this." And I rewrote it, and then they would say, "No, we're not taking this." So I just said, "Fuck it, dude." And I never appealed my good conduct medal. And so I lost, and I was on a dead man profile, right? I lost my good conduct medal for being fat. That's all they could get me on was height and weight. Meanwhile, you got Norris, who had a company grade, and he still got his GCM, right? Um,
They didn't give me anything either, man. My last good conduct medal, I ended up fighting for when I got out. They didn't give me an award
I
when
didn't
I
get
left
no
the unit.
plaque. I got
Like
or certificate. Norris got. I didn't get nothing, dude.
the turnover was awful, and it was very clear to me what they were doing. They were pushing all us old guys with the experience out to build an army that kind of, I don't even know what they wanted. I
Bingo.
really don't.
That's what, and that was my perspective. Was I couldn't help but look around, and most of the people didn't have a deployment patch. Most leaders didn't have a deployment patch, and I started seeing the writing on the wall. I was like, "Oh, this is what they want." They're sending the E2s fresh out of basic to Ranger School, and us salty guys that had combat experience, they were just passing over, you know. And so, no, man. So it was funny because I did get Wounded Warrior Battalion. I got set up with the VA before I ever even ETS'd. I had a VA appointment here in Fort Worth before I ever even got my 214. I should have been a med board. The first thing the VA told me, and it pissed me off, the PA, "Yeah, you should have been a med board. You got fucked." First thing the VA ever told me, you know? And I was like, "Oh,
It is what it is, man. Like you got what you deserve now, I
yes,
hope.
I'm pretty taken care of."
And so I want to, you told me a story when we met or reconnected or whatever, a couple of weeks ago when I asked you to come on the show. But I want you to tell the story about you going to college afterwards, because I think this paints a really incredibly dark picture of what it's like for transitioning veterans when we get out. Regardless of where you served or what you did, I think this is a lot more common than people let on to, and it's really kind of inspired a lot of what you do in your professional life right now, if I'm not mistaken, right? So talk about when you decided to go to college. You're out, and this is really the big wake up call for you in your transition, which really started you on your healing path and all the work that you're doing now. And I think this is going to serve as a really good example for other veterans who come across this show, that you're not alone in this, and that you can come out of this transition hole on the other side and live a life that is joyful, fulfilling, and really in line with your core values and beliefs and what you want to be doing with your life. So floor is yours, man. This is an incredible story. It makes me angry and sad and happy and all of that at the same time.
Well, it was weird, man. The example I used to people when I got out, it felt like, and I did a road trip. Me and my ex-wife, we drove because we didn't get divorced till 6 months after I got out. We drove from Seattle down to Texas, right? And I was smoking weed the whole way down. Ended up getting pulled over by Arizona State Patrol at a speed trap right as I crossed over the border. Um, and funny, he gave me a warning, man. They didn't search my car. I think he knew. I told him, "Hey, I just got out of the army, man. I'm going back to Texas." Right. And okay. And my whole point, dude, is I was stuck in vacation mode. I remember like I didn't know what was up or down. I had my only understanding of the real world was from being a soldier, right? So in my mind, looking back, it felt like leave, bro. Like I was just on leave, right? And I tell people it felt like a washing machine. Like you turn the knob, and then they ripped the knob off and threw it away, if that makes sense. Because I was stuck in soldier mode. I was like, I don't know how to not be a soldier. I don't know who I am, right? And I was just here. I was a 21-year-old kid. I got out 1 month before my 22nd birthday, right? And so I'm sitting here, dude, just living it up, right? Not living life well, living like a child, like a teenager. What was I doing at 17, right? Right. And so finally, I mean, I was doing the VA, dude. I was on terminal leave when the VA had me on an operating table for my shoulder. It was my first slap repair. It was a slap tear, was what it was, right?
I'm glad you had a slap tear and not a labrum tear, because I had the labrum tear
I've been
and
told. I
not
think
great.
slap includes the labrum, dude. It's the labrum rotate. It is the worst injury you can get. It is,
It's
yes, it
all
is
of
the
them.
worst. Everybody has always told me it is the worst shoulder injury you can get. It-
Maybe I had the same thing, because I actually tore the tendon, the bicep tendon off, and my rotator cuff had some issues, and like 60% of my labrum
That
is just
sounds like
shredded in my
slap.
left
I would
shoulder.
look into that because that's the ball and socket. They told me mine was the 11 to the 3 o'clock. It was just ripped.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right
same
there,
thing.
dude.
Yeah.
Big when we have similar builds, very broad chested.
Well, and it doesn't help that your buddy Nate Audie and I, we had a competition. I weighed 250 pounds over there, and I was yoked. And Audie, he's not he's not I mean, he's super physically gifted, but he's just not a big guy. And he started doing muscle ups, and he's like, your big ass can't do shit like this. So what happens? I go out there and I start cranking him out. And he just his jaw hit the fucking wood platform when I was doing that. And he's like, you're not supposed to be able to do this. And I think probably a lot of that contributed to why I tore my shoulder, because I shouldn't be doing shit
Right.
like that
No,
big.
that's true. But had that repair, man, and it was the summertime. And so I was just chilling all that summer recovering from that shoulder surgery. I stepped through my parents' house. And one thing to note, and I don't fault my parents for this, I remember, dude, like my whole world had changed. Like my view of the world, my view of life. And yet I remember getting home and my parents just treated me like they did when I was 17. Like, no, he's back now, not in a bad way. And they loved me, but they just didn't get it, and they didn't try to get it. And again, most people don't. They just don't know where to start. They don't know what they don't know. Right. Um, and so I do remember feeling really frustrated because I was like, man, my parents are talking to me and treating me the same way they did when I was a teenager. Right. And so that was part of it was I need to get the F out of here, get my own apartment. And I was like, well, I need to go to school to get that GI Bill money. Right. And so I did that. And I went to sign up, man. And I remember this was it's funny because we're actually going on a family vacation in August and we haven't been on one since this story. So I had just gotten out. We were going to Florida to Destin. Um, I was signing up for school and I go to the college. I went to the local community college. Um, and when I was going to register, you had to do new student orientation. Well, number one, there was no vet program. There were no vet advisors per se. You had to kind of figure it all out on your own. There was a VA guy who was there 2 days out of the week type of thing, right? And he was kind of a "F you, why are you bothering me" guy. He was a VA employee, you know? And so I remember figuring it all out. I'm at the very last leg. All you got to do to register for classes now is do the orientation. So I get to this freaking college. I'm looking at this map. Man, I don't know these buildings or whatever. I'm getting confused. I would have been early, but by the time I found the room, it was about 5 minutes over, 10 minutes over. And there was a sign on the door. It said, if you're late and if you're reading this and you are late, the door is locked. Please go reschedule at the counselor's office. Like, okay, walk my happy ass all the way back up there, go up to the desk lady, and I said, "Ma'am," I said, I got locked out. I didn't know where the room was. They said to come up here. "Well, okay, sir, we can get that rescheduled for you." I said, "Is there any way that I could just get into that one?" "No, sir, that's out of the question." Okay, all right. Well, what do you got? "Well, sir, the only one we have is next week." I said, "Well, that's not going to work. I'm going to be in Florida. I'm going to be out of town." "Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that." Like with an attitude and everything, right? She was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I guess you're going to have to decide whether you want to go to college or go to Florida," with a freaking tone and everything, dude. And I was like, "What?" I was like taken back. Like, this is like a middle-aged lady, right? And I don't remember. I said, I said, "Well, that's unacceptable." I said, I don't accept that." She goes, "Excuse me?" I said, "Right." I said, "That's not going to work. So what I'm saying is we need to figure something out so I can get signed up for college classes." "Well, sir, I've just told you your only option." I said, "Right." I said, "But I'm not accepting that." And I said, "We got to get this shit figured out." And that was, "Did you just curse at me?" I said, "Well, I'm not cussing at you, ma'am. I'm sorry." And I was, ma'am, I was like army mode, right? And I said, "But I'm trying to get this figured out." "Well, sir, there's nothing to figure out. And if you don't want this next date, then you need to just leave." I said, "No, ma'am, I'm trying to get registered for school. I'm a veteran on the GI Bill." And she said, like, "I don't care." I remember her saying that. "I don't care. I'm not going to be spoken to by a student like that." And I think I might have got angry. "I'll talk to you however the hell I want to talk to you. I started barking
Yeah.
back, dude. I was. I
Triggered.
was I was super triggered, bro. I
Triggered.
was seeing
Yeah.
red. I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm just trying to like figure this out." She said something, man, and I remember I had my phone out at this point because I had pulled up my calendar to look at dates. And I was kind of leaning against her desk. Well, then she said something. She goes, "Well, sir, you're being combative at this." She starts gaslighting me. "You're being combative at this point, sir, and you need to leave." I said, "Ma'am, can I speak to your boss?" "No, sir, no, sir." And I said, "Well, look, I'm not fucking leaving." And that she smiled, man. She smiled. She goes, "That's okay." And she stands up in those little police call boxes. She went and hit the button, and the lights going off, right? And campus police. "Yes, sir. I have a violent student up here right now, and I need police response right away." And I said, "Violet." I remember I was like, "Violet." And so I'm sitting there, and then she's blowing this thing up, dude, blowing this out of proportion. She goes into the little back office, and now a gentleman standing in the doorway. I hadn't moved from my spot. I was still exactly where I was, bro, standing against the desk. And this gentleman standing in the doorway like I'm some like violent guy, right? And I'm like, "What in the shit, dude?" And as I'm sitting there, I remember now my hands are shaking. I'm so anxious. I'm like having a panic attack. And my phone falls. It just flips out like that onto her desk. And she goes, "He's throwing things. He's throwing things." Just completely just gaslighting me, right? And I remember I turned around. I'm getting into fight. I was in fight or flight at this point, right? And I'm sitting there debating, and I was like, "Dude, I only have a window here to bolt before the cops get here, right?" And I was like really debating it, dude. I was about to just take off, like run for the hills. And around that time, dude, a gentleman had popped around the corner. He was just staring at me, checking me out, right, for about 30 seconds. And as I'm sitting there having a panic attack, dude, he said, "Sir, come here, come here." And he pulls me into the office, and I sit down. He shuts the door, and I think I started crying. I think I started like crying. I said, "Dude, I don't know what's happening right now." And he said, "I believe you." Like, he told me, he said, "I believe you." I said, "I am so confused, man. I'm just sitting here trying to get registered for school, and she's sitting here talking so rude to me and was like being just completely dismissive and not helping." And I told him a little bit. I said, "I just got out of the army 2 months ago." And he was like, "Look, man, I'm going to get you down there to that orientation. We'll get this taken care of." And I said, "Thank you." And so we started, him and I, he told me I'm the assistant dean of the campus or assistant dean of admissions, right? I said, okay. So we start to walk down the stairs. There was a L-shaped or whatever little stairwell. As we're walking down, here comes freaking 15 campus cops, maybe 10, dude, but a bunch, a whole squad of cops with their hands on their belt running upstairs, right? And I'm like, oh boy. And so I whisper, I said, hey, should we stop and tell them it's all good? And he said, no, sir. No, sir. Let me get you down to the room. He said, let's not talk to them right now. I said, oh, okay. Right. Like I don't think I was fully understanding. Like they were putting the campus on lockdown, bro, over this. This was that big of a deal, right? Um, they
She
didn't even
just
well, they
took
didn't
it
even know that
way
he
too
had told me
fucking
in the
far.
office, and so she was saying there's a violent person on campus. They were about to put the campus on lockdown, like full blown, right? And so I remember I get into the room, he gets me in there, and as I'm sitting in the office, I'm like, or in the classroom doing the orientation, I'm looking in the window. There's cop cars starting. Dude, the city cops were starting to show up, and I'm like, they don't ever call the city cops for the college. They have their own police. And so I'm like, oh crap, like this is becoming a really big thing, you know? And I'm thinking, dude, they're gonna come in this door. They're gonna come in here and grab me, you know? Um, Finally it chills out. 4 hours later, as we're leaving the classroom, that gentleman's parked by the front door on his laptop, just doing work. And he said, hey, have a seat. And I sat with him, and there's Aries again. Aries, come on, stop playing dead. um, no, so as I'm sitting there, man, he just talks to me. He said, hey, did you grow up in a family that curses? I said, yeah, my parents cuss a little bit, but they're not potty mouths, you know? And yeah, it's just the army really. And he said, well, he said, I grew up in a family that cusses. And he said, I know people cuss just to cuss. He said, I don't think she did. I think she took your vulgarity as like an attack at her. And I said, well, I said, maybe I said, and he told me, he said, she always has complaints. He said, and actually, just so you know, she went home today and said she felt like her life was threatened and she was traumatized. So she went home early. And I was like, wow, okay. Um, and so, it is what it is, and he just told me, he said, man, I don't think you did anything heinous. He said, but just think about that. And he even told me, he said, those police officers wanted to come down here and they kept telling me, oh, we just want to talk to him. We just want to talk to him. And he said, you and I both know how that would have ended. Right. And I was like, dude, I really appreciate that, man. And so I started going to school. That got me in the door. He got me enrolled. But what a first experience. Okay. Now enter college. Okay. They didn't have a veteran program, but they had a club, Northeast Veterans Association. And all these jokers would do, man, is smoke weed till the sun came up, drink like we were still in the barracks, right? Super unhealthy. Um, I attached.
And you were participating in this? Of course. Because it's what you know, it's familiar. And I mean, it is, it's familiar. It's like you're back in, you just said it, back in the barracks with the homies, right? Like just different setting, not training, going to class, maybe going
Exactly.
to
It
class.
was weird too, and again, I know a lot more now. But my only understanding of military was infantry, and as you know, I served back when it was just men. So I wasn't used to females or anything like that, and let alone other veterans of other branches. And it's funny because being a grunt, dude, being infantry, when I share stories to other vets, they're like jaw on the ground, like they can't fathom that's true, right? The things we went through.
When I say it repeatedly on this show, the infantry is just a different world from the rest of the army, and I've heard it from Marines as well, right? When I talk to the Marines, it's a different Marine Corps when you're in the infantry, just like it's a different army when you're in the infantry. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it, but it's
Well, I always
true.
say,
It's very true.
military service, your experience may differ. you know,
Yeah,
that's
for
what
sure.
everybody gets. I've had a buddy that's still in the infantry. He went in as I was getting out. He's a staff sergeant now, and he's told me, he said, "Boyd, in 10 years, I don't think I've gone through what you went through in three." You know, and he's gone to Syria, but again, different army now. You know what I mean? Um, but this club, dude, I befriended the only other infantry vet, right? Because again, infantry's rare. So I befriended this dude. I was way too over trusting when I was younger, you know what I mean? But he was about 10 years older than me. I think like early 30s when I was early 20s. Man, we got really close. He was an Iraq war vet. Buddy. I mean, dude, we were hanging out all the time. Okay. Fast forward, man, it was the December 26th of 2015, day after Christmas. Ex-wife comes up to me, "Hey, I want a divorce," you know. Said, "Oh, it sucks, you know, but all right, it is what it is." I mean, I was heartbroken, but all right, we're gonna get a divorce. Well, fast forward 3 weeks, man. My brother was partying with one of these vets, right? Guy, the vet was real messed up, and him and the infantry vet were roommates. Okay. And my brother's partying with this vet, and he's real messed up. Said, "Hey, man, don't tell your brother, but his wife's been hooking up with my roommate for 3 months now." Right. Dude, I'm telling you. And so my whole life was a lie, dude, you know? And oh, I came to find out the Vietnam veteran professor advisor of the club knew about it, and I had him in a class. And I remember he asked me once, "Boyd, why are you with your wife?" Like he was trying to freaking give me a breadcrumb trail, you know what I mean? And I didn't catch it. And I felt so stupid, man. I was so angry. I said, "Why didn't anybody just tell me?" Right? Well, then I remember calling Townsend, and Townsend even said, "Boyd," he said, "You know she was messing on you up in Washington, right?" And I said, "What?" I said, "I'm sure." I said, "I'm sure." He goes, "No, Boyd, you're not hearing me. She was messing around on you in Washington." And I was like, "Who?" And he goes, "I ain't gonna tell you." And I, to this day, I don't want to know, right? But right there, dude, it's, you know, I had so many people try to tell me not to marry that girl, you know, and I didn't listen to a single one of them, you know.
Hey, we gotta learn the hard way sometimes, man, really. And yeah, 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 yep. So so what you find that out and that just sends you even further down the hole, right? So how do you get out of the hole and end up doing the work that you're doing now? Because that's the important part, right? I mean, we could sit here and you've given in detail like how bad the transition was for you, to include all the shit you dealt with for your career. And just in the interest of the listeners' time, let's talk about how you climb out of that hole. And you're doing amazing work now, man. Homefront healing and youngest VFW post commander in Texas. That's I didn't know that until I was preparing for the
One
show.
of,
This
one
that's
of. I don't
amazing.
know the
Good for
exact
you.
record, but I know most of these guys are in their 40s, 30s, you know what I mean? I was young 20s. Um, no, in the interest of time, you know, it got worse before it got better, obviously. You know, you would think right there where we left off, "Oh god, that's his rock bottom." Oh no, it gets way worse, right? But that's the thing, is it can always get lower. As long as we have a heartbeat, dude, the rock bottom can always get lower, right? And I dropped out, went to work at a liquor store. Suicide by police was on the mind, right? I ended up getting assigned a special cases detective who would check in with me once a week, you know, and like I was high risk, man. I really was. And he even told me, he said, "Boyd, I can turn on the news, man, and you can see veteran gunned down by police." And he said, "I don't want that to happen in my town, you know?" And so he was trying to work with me. And so I went to stay with a buddy. I removed myself from the chaos of the situation, slept on a guy's couch with my dog for about a month or two, right? um Decided, I was like, all right, I'm gonna keep fighting this fight, right? I'm gonna keep doing this. I went home, got signed back up for school, and in that time they had hired a LPC, a licensed counselor who was a Desert Storm veteran, to start a veterans program kind of because of me. Like I was a large reason for that, where they said, wow, they need help. This guy, I mean, this guy's a great example of why we need support for vets, right? So when I go to meet this man, he says, "Oh, Mr. Boyd, I've heard a lot about you," before I ever met him. And I said, "Hey, what's up, man?" And so I started going to this dude, and looking back, I don't think it was per se clinical counseling as much as it was mentorship, dude. Because sometimes I'd sit in his office for 2 hours, 3 hours even, and he would talk, man, and he saw me and he heard me. And he understood me. And I remember, dude, I used to be that guy. I wore all black clothes, and he said to me once, "Why do you wear all black?" I said, "Oh, I'm trying to blend in, go incognito." He said, "You stick out like a sore thumb," you know? And so, but dude, it didn't matter how much I pushed at him, dude. He wouldn't back off. You know what I mean? Like he sat there and he said, "Boyd, I can see you coming a mile away." And he was somebody that I needed, you know? And I think that in some ways he was like a father figure of sorts, right? And he gave me a lot of support. And fast forward, right? Like I said, it got worse. Some addictions arose. And he told me, he said, it's going to get worse. And as I started to talk about things, right, it got worse. It got a lot worse. I felt it's like I use the example of dusting off the cobwebs, right? Um, and I started self-medicating with various things. I was still drinking every day. Then substances got in the picture. And, at the peak of my addiction, man, I was so sick that I would have tried to convince Jesus Christ himself why medicinal cocaine should be legal. Right. I'm not joking. I was that sick, dude.
I
I was
believe.
like, I'll explain this to you. Right.
I'm sorry, brother. It's like that sick sense of humor and the infantryman in me coming out because I've been as low as you have, right? Just not substance. Alcohol was the only substance I ever messed with, but I've had buddies who would do the same thing, convince you why medicinal cocaine
Addiction's a
is
hell of a thing,
right.
dude. It
Like
really is.
it
Um,
is. It's crazy, especially like when you get educated about what addiction really is and learn how to help people through that. Right. I'm finishing up my Being True to You course, where it's psychedelic integration and addiction recovery coaching. Fascinating stuff. I never really looked at addiction super hard until I started taking that course and I started learning about it. And it's like, man, you can be addicted to anything. It's not substances. Sugar was
Dopamine,
my
bro, it all
biggest
ties
addiction.
into our reward receptors in our brains.
It's crazy. It's
So I
fascinating
did a
stuff.
lot of the work in those 2 years working towards my associates. Okay. And I think those were the years of stabilization. Okay. I think
And by work, you're talking about your healing journey, correct? Yeah. So you're talking about unresolved childhood traumas. You're dealing with the stuff from the deployment, leading up to the deployment, all the bullying, right? Being vulnerable, I assume, with this Desert Storm guy, this mentor of yours. And to me, it sounds like he is just the epitome of what a leader and a mentor is, right? Sees somebody in need, understands that he has the capacity to help them, but meets you where you're at and kind of coaches you through the
absolutely.
that whole
And I was gonna say I had
process,
gone at
right?
this point to 2 VA therapists. They were shit, dude. They were shit. There was one redneck Arkansas National Guard guy who he would try his best, man, but he just, I was only a nasty girl, but da da da. It just wasn't good therapy. It wasn't good counseling, right? And this Desert Storm guy, again, he had that life wisdom, right? And he just had the gift, is what I would call it, right? Um, and like I said, he spent, man, just countless hours with me out of just the, kindness of his heart, really. Um, and he, along the way, he got me linked up with 12-step groups. He knew a lot of veterans that are in recovery, right? Vietnam vets killed a lot of people. I mean, he knew some real guys, man, that walked this world of recovery and mental health. So he got me hooked up with some folks. And I remember as I was approaching graduation, I said, I think I know what I want to do. I want to do what you do and help people and be of service and be a therapist. And he told me, he said, don't be a licensed counselor. He said, go the social worker route. And I said, why? And he said, well, you can do what I do and then some. You get your more versed, medical, a lot of things. Right. And I said, okay. So I signed up for the School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Arlington, which, by the way, they're a yellow ribbon school. Fantastic vet program there. I mean, they are just phenomenal. They have a whole building dedicated to their veteran program. It is, man, and they had the staff for it. They just solid. They're one of the top 5 military schools in the country. Um, and so going to the School of Social Work, I jokingly say I was learning about myself. I was like, "Oh, they're talking about me in these lectures," as I'm taking notes. But you start to learn why we are the way we are. And that's the difference between being a licensed counselor and a social worker, in my opinion. I've worked with a shit ton of both. Counselors, man, they're very solution focused. Oh, hey, we're not going to go there. Let's do some deep breathing. Let's do some coping skills. Well, dude, sometimes people need to be heard. They need to tell their story and have that validated, right? And maybe they need to tell it to understand themselves, right? Social workers, that's our realm, dude. That's the biopsychosocial, right? We know how it all, everything that makes us who we are today is because of what we've gone through or come from, right? And I can just remember, dude, taking notes, and it was like, oh my God, I felt like I was looking in the rear view, working. That's why I do that. Oh man, that's why I feel this way. That's why I got upset. I went into fight or flight. You know what I mean? Oh, that's man, I felt isolated and alienated. Sociology, bro. That was one of my, I mean, that is what social work is. But I remember I took an intro to psychology and I hated it. I took intro to sociology and I loved it. Why do veterans kill themselves? That was one of the topics, right? Why do people get addicted? Why do children that are sexually abused end up typically being abusers? You know what I mean? Just understanding why things are the way that they are. I think people don't talk about those things enough. And there's so much there generationally. Former generations, my clinical supervisor who did my residency, she said she got licensed in 81 or 82, first job at the Dallas VA. And she said she had World War II vets with prefrontal lobotomy scars. And that's living memory. That's not a textbook. That is a living memory. Um, and it's sad, bro. Just 50 years ago, you had institutionalization, um, which, they were locking people up and throwing away the key. And we didn't switch to community care till like the 70s, man. So yeah, we wonder why our parents' generation, the baby boomers, why they didn't talk about feelings. Well, because their parents' generation, silent generation, greatest generation, didn't, because they locked them up and threw away the key, you know? And so what happened from a generation being silenced essentially was a buildup of systemic trauma, of what would become systemic trauma. That's why you have a whole generation that's traumatized and a whole generation that's the way they are now, right?
Do you think that this is what perpetuates the suicide epidemic in the GWAT veteran community today?
Absolutely. I think culture has a lot to do with it because if you talk about feelings, you're a pussy, right?
Well, not only that, but I mean, I can remember after the first and second deployment, even so, you're talking '04 to '05, and then again '06 to '07. Even trying to make sense of all the shit I saw and did. And I watched people's careers get ended for going to get help because they couldn't handle it anymore. I watched people get kicked out of the army for that. And so that reinforced in me that we don't talk about these things. We continue to compartmentalize them, put them in that little box that we have told ourselves we're never going to access again. The truth in that is that that box is going to explode one day, and there's nothing you can do about it at
You know
all
what's
whatsoever.
interesting is in the mental health world, man, 30 or 40 years ago, they didn't know that. You'd think it's common sense. No, they told people compartmentalize and that's live your life. They didn't realize that, oh wait, you have to unpack it because you can compartmentalize, yes, to push through and accomplish the mission, but it'll sit there and rot until you look at it. And I know people who have told me, "Oh no, I was trained to compartmentalize and leave it." Right? Right, and I'm sitting here working things back going, "No, that's why things are bad, because you can't just leave it, and it's gonna get worse before it gets better." And it's scary, man, it's ripping off the scab, right? And it hurts. It does hurt, right? But that has to happen. Yeah, that has to happen to fully heal. The example I use, and you might appreciate this, I say we can't put band-aids on bullet holes. And whether it's drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling, dude, look at how many adrenaline junkie vets, motorcycles, band-aids on bullet holes. They're all symptoms. Those aren't the problems. Those are attempts at solving the problem, right? The problem is the problem. These are just symptoms, right? And so what it comes down to is finding healthy alternatives, right? Not high risk, not dangerous, not destructive ones, but understanding that that's the brain's attempt at healing or self-medicating, right? At surviving. It's neuroplasticity though. And that's why Adam, why it always bleeds out. The brain wants to heal itself. Neuroplasticity. So when vets are like, "Oh, I'm all good, man, but when I get blackout drunk, I beat my wife and break half my house." Well, that's your brain wanting to heal, right? It's gonna come
Yeah,
out.
yeah. And it's funny to hear you talk about the neuroplasticity, and then having that psychedelic experience that I had a year ago has led me down that rabbit hole, and all the studies that show it builds new neural pathways and it restores the neuroplasticity that we have basically deadened from compartmentalizing so much and not dealing with the stuff. And it's fascinating stuff, man. I hope that we continue to make great strides with like Heroic Hearts. I know they're fighting the MDMA fight right now. I just signed a little thing saying that I'm willing to go speak about my experiences with psychedelics to really push this stuff through, because it's hard to argue with the studies saying that it cures 73% of PTSD in combat veterans. Insane, right? Like, why would we? I know why, but why would we put this in a box and not tell anybody about it if it just makes our community better? Like, because there's no money in
Exactly.
it.
And I'm going
That's
to say
why.
this, man. I'm trying to pick my words wisely here. Well, many, many years ago, before I was a licensed social worker, as I was in my healing journey, for me, it was psilocybin. Okay. Took a little bit too much psilocybin that day. And for the first time in my life, had what we would call a bad trip, right? Um, but it was eye opening for me because I think Adam at the time I didn't realize how sick I was. Again, I was drinking every day. I was the shit. I was the guy, right?
I know that for a fact though, because I didn't know how sick I was. Right. And that's what ayahuasca showed me. It showed me how sick I was, how out of balance I was, and the path forward to alleviating all of that, all in 3 nights instead of 15 years of therapy. But
Well,
yeah,
and the thing is like I said, I think the 2 years of mentorship, counseling, whatever you call it, were stabilization that kept me alive, right? I don't think the healing started until 2018 ish, right? And again, I'd been going to 12 steps and man, I'd get sober for a month and I'd go back out, right? I just couldn't get it to stick. And I was trying. And this night, man, I had psilocybin, right? And it just showed me everything that I was missing, right? I remember looking at my fireplace and it was the rocks looked like skulls, just death, right? Death and evil and darkness was all that I saw. And it was a scary experience, man. But what it showed me was that, oh my God, there are things you're running from that are still there and they're not going to get better until you face it, right? And acknowledging that it's there is the first part of that, right? Because I was running.
Well, I want to point something out before you had your psilocybin experience, and this is a little woo woo for those that are listening, but I'm a woo woo guy now because I believe in magic and all this shit, right? But before you took psilocybin, doing the 12 steps, the mentorship, the self healing, that is the medicine calling you. And that's the integration work that's not often talked about that has to happen with psychedelics. And it's also, I'm sure you did a lot more work through the social work classes, learning about yourself after your psilocybin experience, which also serves as integration work. It's why I've been able in the last year to start a business, start a community that these two things are going to birth other businesses. I've got other things going on. I've lost almost 100 pounds. I've completely changed my life. I speak with a soft tongue. I consider other people's perspectives. I meet them where they're at. I understand they're on their own journey. That's all the integration work that you're
Absolutely.
talking about,
Well,
right?
and I tell people I think going to the school of social work was like getting years of therapy at once because it's self therapy, if anything, right? I'm learning now, I'm understanding, and it was hard, man. Um, and I just remember, dude, like it clicked with me. I knew that. So I was supposed to start an internship in January of 19, and I was still in addiction summer of 18. And I knew I was like, dude, you have got to get this under control or you're not going to be able to progress, right? You have got to get this figured out. And thank God, man, a couple of months before that internship, it clicked. And it was November 18th of 2018 was the last day that I touched hard drugs, alcohol. They say not to do this, okay? But I gave myself a date. I said Sunday is the last day, right? That's how deep I was in the addiction. I said Sunday is the last hurrah. I went big, right? And that was it. And the very next day, people are knocking at my door. Hey, man, I got beer. I said, nope. I said, guys, I told you. I said, it was yesterday. And that's a whole nother story, when people push the boundaries.
Well, This is awesome, man, because I did the same thing to get myself off of alcohol. I said, this is enough. And for me, the wake up call was I had come here to Florida to visit my dad, which I only got to do once every 3 years living in Washington State because it costs an arm and a leg to come out here or whatever. I had snuck airplane bottles, right? Because I knew I was going to go through withdrawals. And when he dropped me off at the end of that week at the airport in tears, saying, he knew I was drinking, right? And my dad's been sober for 20 years or more. And he knew, and he just looked at me with tears in his eyes and he's like, son, you need to stop drinking because you're killing yourself. And I can't bear that. And I knew I had a problem when I walked into the airport. And the first thing I did when I got through security is go sit at the bar and get a double 7 and 7. Like brush that off like nothing ever happened. Fast forward a few weeks, throwing up some blood, realizing I can't keep doing this to myself. And I did the same thing. I was like, today's the last day. This is it. This is my last hurrah. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to come home. I'm going to do my normal routine and I'm never going to do it again. And to this day, I don't drink very often. I'll have a couple of beers or whatever during football season to watch a game, but it's largely under control because I chose not to let a substance control my life. So I'm glad that we have a very similar story in that. And it's not a great idea because the withdrawals from alcohol are awful. They're so fucking bad. And I didn't know it at the time, but they're the
People
only
die. I
withdrawals that
knew
will
it.
kill you.
When I worked at the psych hospital, we had a patient pass from alcohol detox, and that was with.
So buying a PlayStation 4 and Destiny to get yourself sober and locking yourself in your apartment. And again, I relate to the story because as soon as you quit drinking, like when you're drinking like a madman like that, you can't get anybody to go out with you. I'm going out 7 nights a week, every fucking night drinking. And nobody wants to, I got people telling me like, dude, I can't go out tonight. I can't keep up with you. I have to quit. And then the minute I decide to get sober, now they're knocking down my door, blowing up my phone. Like, hey, we going to party tonight? What's up? Where are you at? And it's like, no, dude, I told you all. Like, where have you been the last 6 weeks that I wanted you to come party with me?
You bring up a good point, which is video games. Okay. Something that helped me when I was isolated. I didn't have any vet friends. I had no friends, man. It was just me and my now wife, girlfriend at the time, living together. Um, just her and I, man. And she has a similar background to me. So her and I click in that regard, that we kind of were, we had each other. Right. And I remember having nobody, and then for me, it was Xbox, dude. That saved my life a time or two, and I mean that, dude. I pushed this. Colorasi, me and Cola used to play Battlefield every day for a couple years when we first got out, and it sounds corny, man, but like we would play for hours and talk to each other for hours. I mean, and it was like you were there with them. You know what I mean? Like me and him, he helped me so much, Matthew Colorasi, right? Just being there for somebody, right? I needed that. And I'm glad that I had the gaming community really helped me a lot during my college years. Because again, I wasn't working with VA disability and GI Bill. I wasn't working, right? Which was a good thing. I think I needed the time to sift through the rubble. But that helped a lot. Was the gaming community, and I got involved with that. Um, but fast forward to 2018, and that was the beginning of the healing. Which it sounds crazy to think about like that. That's years of just survival, right? To reach that place of okay, now I know what some of the issues are, and I need to turn and face them. And it was hard, man, and it was difficult, doing that, healing while becoming a social worker. I remember talking to my mentor, the Desert Storm guy, and I said, I don't think I'm ready. I'm still figuring things out. And he said, if you wait till you're ready, you'll never go. He said, just move. Right. And I said, gotcha. And it makes sense now because that's part of the journey. You start moving and you figure it out. Right. Worked at the psych hospital, man, for a year and a half. That was a very eye-opening experience, very different culture, very politically charged company that I was at, to one side of the aisle, right, who tends to not like veterans. And so when COVID started coming about, dude, I was the first one gone, man. I was the first one out of there, and I saw that coming. Um,
So is this kind of what pushed you into opening your own practice versus going to another practice? Because just knowing you from our time that we served together, our brief time that we served together, and I'll be honest, I don't remember a lot of interactions that we had together, but also like it makes sense for a
We
senior
weren't in
staff
the same
sergeant and an E
platoon
four to
ever,
not
you
have a
know?
lot of interaction. Right, of course, but I never remember hearing anybody from that time in ACO being interested in entrepreneurship. So, I definitely believe here the path back to purpose is through just or entrepreneurship, just owning more of yourself, your time, your finances, being able to get closer to the revenue, whatever that looks like. But it's a never-ending mission for us, right? There's always something that you can be doing to move the business forward or whatever. And so that's why I believe it's a path back to purpose. And clearly you found purpose in starting your own practice. So I'm curious, like, was it you just didn't want to go work in another clinic for somebody who was going to be able to treat you that way? And you're like, I can do better on my own helping
Well,
people.
for
How did that
one,
come about?
social work is a politically charged field, right? And I hated that where I'm like, what do politics have to play in with helping folks? Right.
Nothing.
Most
They don't have
classes, man,
anything
I
to
was
do
one
with
of
that.
maybe 2 or 3 men in the classes, and not even in a derogatory way. There was always a flamboyant gay guy, right? Very rare to have this archetype of a person become a social worker, right? So then fast forward, psych hospital. Hey, why don't we have a program for vets? It's not going to make the hospital any money. Veterans don't want to get help. Oh, that bothered me. I'm like, oh, it's all about money, 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 right? Hey, their insurance sucks. Push their discharge. Get them out of here. Like, wow.
Which I think is a falsehood because TRICARE is
Well,
actually
and
really
I'll
good.
tell you briefly my perspective. They don't make it easy for us as providers. They make it hell. They make it really hard. It triples our workload, and then they pay us less than market value sometimes. Often, not some, most of the time. And so that's why the majority of your decent clinicians are cash only. My practice is not, because I voluntarily sacrifice and don't maximize my profitability just because I got into this to help folks. You know what I mean? Um, and so anyway, I wound up at the rehab. I went through the nursing home at COVID, learned a lot about death, a lot of healing, a lot of spirituality. 2020 was when I found my spirituality. I wound up working at a Christian rehab for teen boys. Um, and I'll tell you, man, I used to always say I would never work with teenagers. I took a write up at the psych hospital because I was adamant I will not work with teenagers. And I think it came from a place of my own lack of healing. Yeah.
And
And then
pain.
come to
Yeah,
find
trauma.
out, bro,
Yeah.
I became like one of the best employees of that rehab. They fast tracked me. I went from program therapist, I skipped lead therapist, and then I made director of clinical services. I was like the second in command running that entire residential treatment center, right? I appreciate that. And truthfully, and this is a cool thing too, relevant. I had 3 months as a machine gun team leader, but I always was the guy, dude. I was always watching. I was always watching leaders. What did they do? Again, crappy bosses, right? There's a difference between a boss and a leader. Bosses try to kick you out, get you in trouble. They just bark at you. Leaders lead, right? Servant leadership. And so I applied those concepts, man, to the civilian world. And I mean, I had a grown woman twice my age crying, saying, George, you were the best boss I ever had in my entire life. You were the best leader I ever had. And all I did, man, was what my NCOs did. I just did servant leadership. I put my people first, right? And just the goodness that comes from that, right? So basically, to answer your question, I thought this rehab was real different. I wondered why they couldn't hold a director longer than 6 months, right? Always that turnover was so fast. It's all money, 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 and that's what it is. They promoted from within the hardest working employees and then you get behind closed door with the CEO, right? And the senior leadership, and it's all a front. It's all fake, right? You say one thing, but your actions are something else, right? That's incongruent. And dude, I had an ethical dilemma last summer where I said, God, I'm doing so well. I'm making the most I've ever made. Life is good. And I struggled because I said, you know what? And this was my resolution. It's not about money. Okay. When I die, I can't take it with me. It's not about titles. It's not about roles. It's not about salary. I am a therapist. This is what I was called to do. Funny enough, ONET, when I did my thing, it told me therapist master's degree. I said, "Bull, dude, I'm not doing that. I'm Nobody in my family ever went to college." I said, "No, that ain't me." Lo and frickin' behold, I didn't even had no idea I wanted to be a therapist back then. No clue, dude. No clue. Okay. I kind of had an interest in the psychology world, but I never "Oh, I'm gonna be a therapist." Nobody in my family went to college. Half of my extended family didn't graduate high school, right? Um, and truthfully, man, I mean, to each their own, but I give all the glory to God, right? Like my spirituality, because I'm like, that is the only way somebody like me becomes a cycle breaker. I wasn't just me, dude. And that was part of my healing journey, was finding my spirituality and my higher power, right? And giving that to him. That was a large part. But then with the for profits and the rehabs, that was what it was last summer. I truly felt called. I felt like it was a spiritual thing. And I said, I want to be one of the good ones. And so I'm
I love that, dude. That's so good because a lot of the people I talk to on here, that's really what it is for them. They just want to serve something bigger than themselves. It's not about money. It's about that feeling that you get when you help a client overcome whatever it is that ails them. It's to me, as I talk to transitioning veterans and I help them understand where they're at and what they're going to go through. And I'm not licensed to do that. I'm just a coach, right? Like, but through my own experience and all the tools that I've learned, yoga, breathwork, meditation, mindfulness, sitting with yourself and being present with yourself, it's probably all the same stuff that you use, right? You know, and anybody can have access to this stuff to start healing. And that's really all it takes, is somebody to sit with them, meet them where they're at, listen to what they have to say. My approach to it is not probably the greatest approach, but I use myself as an example because as a veteran with other veterans, they can relate to that. Oh, well, this dude went through the exact same thing that I've been through. And so I'm so glad that you started your own practice, brother. And I'll be honest, I'll be, I keep up with all you guys as much as I can. I may not say anything or reach out or whatever, but I do like to keep in touch, see what you guys are up to. And I was super proud to see that you were doing this work when you posted about it, when you're going through it. And it's just awesome that there's other guys out there being leaders in the space, helping other veterans, starting their own thing to get away from the money, but to truly just help people. And I'm just so grateful that you're doing that work, man. What would you say your best advice to veterans transitioning, to civilian life? What would you want them to know that is going to help them through that transition?
find a purpose, right? Greater than yourself. Because for all service members, man, they are serving a purpose bigger than themselves. And then they get out, and that's what's lacking. Okay. That's why they feel stagnant. That's why the depression, the self hatred, the self loathing, why it all creeps in. They're not working towards an objective. And so in my mind, man, and this was the reframe 2017 when I was deciding what I wanted to do, I said, dude, there is still a war on, right? There's a war here that's killing soldiers. That was how I thought of it. I mean, it's true. I said, there's still some of those guys, man, I think they're casualties of the war, even though it was here, right? Um, and I said, there is a real war on. I'm a soldier, right? And something that I heard recently that somebody told me, they said, George, this reminds me of you. They said, strong enough to go through it, sensitive enough to sit with it, right? And and that hit me hard, man, because that's the truth. Because there's times I'm like, "F me," right? Like, why is this my calling? Why is this? I love being a therapist, don't get it wrong, but it's hard sometimes, right? You hear the worst of the worst all day long. Why did God lead me to this, right? Because I look back, dude, I was a therapist when I was in elementary school. My friends would come to me, "Hey, I'm sorry your parents are getting a divorce." Like, but it's funny when I look back, and that's a great point, dude. The military molds you to be one way, right? To be what they want you to be. Um, Personally, dude, I think spirituality and God tells us who we are, right? But what it is who the army wants us to be is probably a lot different than who we are born to be, right? And I think part of it, man, like I said, the purpose, but it's honing in and getting back in touch with who we really are. Because I wore my combat boots, man, for 2 years after I got out of the service. I was that guy, like a safety blanket, dude. I didn't wanna let it go, right? I had enmeshed my identity into being a soldier. Um, and just like this hat, dude, that's not who I am. This is not George Boyd, right? This is just something that I've got on, right? And that's externalization. But that's what so many vets are missing, dude, is they enmesh themselves in this false identity over here. And then when that's ripped away from them, what now? Right. So I encourage folks, you don't have to, and I tell people, you don't have to become a therapist or a social worker to serve. Truly, I mean this. Sanitation guys, they're serving their community. Find a way that clicks with you, that you enjoy, to work towards a greater cause outside of ourselves.
I love that, man. Thank you so much for that advice because I think it's spot on, right? Find something that resonates with you that you feel like I could do this forever. I'm not hateful when I have to get up and go to work in the morning, right? That's how you know you found something that,
My worst
aligns with
day
you.
as a therapist is better than my best day at any other job before. That's
Yeah, for sure. Tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, where they can find you. I know you do some telehealth stuff. I don't know how the licensing and all that works, but tell them, what states they can come at you from if they want to work with you and get help. And just let everyone
Yeah, for
know how
sure,
they
man.
can
So
find you.
my website is www.homefronthealing.com. I am on Facebook with Homefront Healing, LinkedIn with Homefront Healing. So they could find me through there. I do have a listing on Psychology Today. I office in Hurst, Texas, which is located in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, more on the Fort Worth side. I am actually dual licensed in the state of Florida for telehealth. It's kind of interesting. Florida has a cool program, man, where they need providers. And so it was free. Like, you just, hey, if you're willing to see some of our Florida people virtual, we'll give you a free telehealth license. And so I love that. I think that's awesome. And so that's kind of how I got into that, man. So I can see people. I do have clients currently all over the great state of Texas, all the way down to the border. Some are local. I would say half are virtual, remote. But yeah, if somebody ever wanted to kind of look into my services, my website would be a really good way to start with that.
Awesome, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you George Boyd, great friend of mine, great soldier when I was serving with him and doing obviously great work now. Please give it up for him. Like, subscribe, rate, review. Let's get this in front of 1 million veterans before May 9th, 2025, when I turn 40. It's a lofty goal, but our community is capable of it. George, dude, I really appreciate your time, man. I thank you for sitting down and doing this with me, and I want to bring you back to do another one at some point, so that we can spend more time talking about what I believe is super important work. It's in alignment with what I've created here, and I just don't have the credentials or the license to do it the way that you do it. But this has been amazing, man. Thank you so much for being here, brother.
I appreciate you, Adam. Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at the Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity, or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources, or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.